My mother asked the entire congregation to pray for me, not in private, not in a whisper. She raised her hand during the Christmas Eve prayer request segment, stood up in the third pew of Grace Community Church, smoothed her holiday dress, and said it loud enough for 300 people to hear. I'd like to ask for prayers for my daughter Isabel. She paused, her voice catching with rehearsed emotion. She's been struggling to find her path, career-wise. She has a good heart, but she just hasn't found her footing yet. If everyone could keep her in their prayers, I'd really appreciate it. 300 heads turned, not to my mother, to me. I was sitting 4 rows behind her on the aisle seat, wearing a simple navy dress and flats, holding a hymnal I hadn't opened. 300 pairs of eyes delivering 300 variations of the same expression: pity, sympathy. The particular compassionate concern that church communities specialize in, the kind that feels like a warm blanket wrapped so tight it becomes a straitjacket. The pastor, David Reeves, nodded from the pulpit. "We'll certainly keep Isabel in our prayers," he said warmly. Then he looked at me, and something flickered across his face. Something the congregation didn't catch, but I did. Because Pastor David Reeves was one of exactly 4 people on earth who knew what my mother didn't. My name is Isabel Crane. I'm 34 years old, and 300 people had just been asked to pray for my career. My career, which at that precise moment consisted of being the founder and CEO of Crane Philanthropic Ventures, a private foundation and investment firm with $3.8 billion in managed assets, charitable programs operating in 23 countries, and a domestic portfolio that included funding for 147 community organizations, 42 schools, 16 medical clinics, and 1 church. This church, Grace Community Church, had received $5 million from my foundation 18 months ago to fund a complete renovation of their building, expansion of their community outreach center, and establishment of a scholarship fund for low-income families in the congregation. Pastor Reeves knew the money came from me, the church's treasurer knew, my attorney knew, my COO knew. 300 congregation members, including my mother, believed the donation came from an anonymous benefactor. They were partially right. It was anonymous. What they didn't know was that the anonymous benefactor was sitting in the 4th pew having her career prayed for. My mother sat down after her prayer request, turning to pat my knee with the gentle condescension of a woman who believed she was helping. "Don't worry, sweetheart," she whispered. "God has a plan for everyone, even late bloomers." My brother Ryan, seated beside her with his wife Melissa, gave me an encouraging nod. Ryan was a corporate attorney at a firm in Hartford. He made $340,000 a year and considered himself successful by every metric this family valued: visible title, quantifiable salary, a career you could explain in 1 sentence at a cocktail party. My sister-in-law Melissa taught yoga and had recently launched an online wellness platform that was, by her own generous estimation, about to take off. She squeezed my hand across the pew. "It'll happen for you, Iz. You just have to believe in yourself." I believed in myself, to the tune of $3.8 billion. But I appreciated the sentiment. The story of how I built a multi-billion-dollar philanthropic empire while my family prayed for my career starts with a funeral and a promise. My grandmother, Eleanor Crane, died when I was 23. she left me $600,000, which my family considered a generous but not life-changing inheritance. What they didn't know was that she also left me something else. A letter. In that letter, she described how she'd spent 50 years watching wealth destroy people, watching families hoard money while communities crumbled, watching churches beg for funding while congregants drove luxury cars, watching the gap between those who had and those who needed grow wider every year while everyone prayed for solutions nobody was willing to fund. She asked me to do something different, build something that makes money and gives it away at the same time, she wrote. Prove that wealth and generosity aren't opposites, they're partners. I took her $600,000 and her philosophy and built exactly what she asked for. Crane Philanthropic Ventures operates on a model that most financial advisors consider impossible. We invest in high-growth companies, generating significant returns. Then we channel a minimum of 40% of those returns into charitable programs. Schools, clinics, churches, community centers, disaster relief, food banks, scholarship funds. The remaining 60% is reinvested to grow the portfolio. The result, after 11 years of compounding, was $3.8 billion in managed assets and over $1.2 billion in total charitable distributions. We'd funded programs in 23 countries. We'd built schools in communities that had never had them. We'd established medical clinics in rural areas where the nearest hospital was 4 hours away. And we'd done it all under the name Crane Philanthropic Ventures, which most people assumed was run by a board of wealthy retirees, not by a 34-year-old woman whose mother was currently asking for prayers on her behalf. The anonymity was essential to the mission. Philanthropy done publicly becomes performance. It becomes about the donor's image instead of the recipient's need. My grandmother understood that. She'd watched wealthy families attach their names to buildings and programs, turning generosity into branding. She wanted something different. She wanted the money to matter more than the name. So I kept my name off everything. The foundation's public filings listed the director as I. Crane. No photographs, no interviews, no galas with my face on the invitation. Just money flowing quietly into communities that needed it, including this one. The $5 million donation to Grace Community Church had been the largest single gift in the church's 90-year history. It funded the new community center that my mother walked through every Sunday. It paid for the scholarship program that had sent 14 kids from the congregation to college last year. It covered the renovation of the sanctuary where 300 people were currently sitting, praying for my career, in a building I'd paid to rebuild. Pastor Reeves knew. He'd met me in his office 18 months ago when I'd presented the donation. He'd cried. Not from gratitude, though there was that, from the weight of what it meant for a community that had been struggling to keep the lights on. He'd asked if I wanted to be recognized publicly. I'd said no. He'd asked why. Because the moment people know, I'd told him, the conversation changes from what the money does to who gave it. And I'd rather they talk about the scholarships than about me. He'd respected that. For 18 months, he'd kept my secret. But tonight, he and I had agreed, was the night the secret ended. Not because of my mother's prayer request, which I hadn't anticipated, but because the church was about to announce a new $8 million expansion project, and the funding was coming from my foundation, and the congregation needed to know who their benefactor was in order to approve the building plans. The timing of my mother's prayer request was God's sense of humor, if you believed in that sort of thing. I did, actually, especially tonight. It was 7:45 p.m. The Christmas Eve service was structured in 3 parts: music and worship, prayer requests and community sharing, then the pastor's Christmas message and announcements. The announcements would come at approximately 8:30 p.m., 45 minutes. My mother was singing "O Holy Night" beside me, her voice slightly off-key but full of conviction. She sang with her eyes closed, which is how she approached most things. Eyes closed, heart open, assumptions unchallenged. Ryan was checking his phone between verses. Melissa was meditating or possibly napping. The congregation sang around us, 300 voices filling a sanctuary that my money had restored, praising God in a building my foundation had saved from foreclosure. I sang too, quietly. The prayer segment continued. Other requests floated up from the pews: a husband's surgery, a daughter's college applications, a family's financial hardship. Each one received the same compassionate murmur from the congregation, the same reassuring nod from Pastor Reeves. Then Frank Mueller, the church treasurer and one of the 4 people who knew my secret, stood up. He was 72, retired from a 40-year career in banking, and possessed the unflappable calm of a man who'd spent his life managing other people's money. He walked to the podium beside Pastor Reeves. "Before we move to tonight's message," Frank said, adjusting the microphone, "the building committee has an announcement regarding our expansion project." A new screen lowered behind the pulpit. On it appeared architectural renderings of the proposed expansion: a new education wing, an expanded community kitchen, a youth recreation center, a counseling facility. The congregation murmured with excitement. They'd been hearing about this project for months, but the renderings were new. The scope was larger than expected. Much larger. "This project," Frank continued, "represents an $8 million investment in our community. And tonight, we're able to announce that it is fully funded." Applause erupted. My mother clapped enthusiastically. Ryan nodded approvingly. 300 people celebrating a gift they assumed came from some distant foundation with a board of wealthy strangers. "The funding comes from the same anonymous benefactor who provided our renovation gift 18 months ago," Frank said. "Crane Philanthropic Ventures." More applause. A few amens. "However," Frank continued, and his voice took on a gravity that quieted the room, "tonight, with the benefactor's permission, we'd like to share something we've been keeping private for 18 months. Pastor Reeves stepped forward. He looked at me. I nodded. The smallest movement, but he saw it. "When our church was facing foreclosure 2 years ago," he began, "a woman came to my office. She was young, quiet. She wore a simple dress and carried a folder with a proposal that would change our community forever. She offered $5 million, not a loan, a gift, for renovation, scholarships, and community programs. The only condition was anonymity." The congregation was still. The air had shifted from celebration to something heavier, more attentive. "I agreed to her terms," Pastor Reeves continued. "For 18 months, I've watched this community benefit from her generosity without knowing her name. I've watched her sit in these pews every Sunday, listening to sermons in a building she saved, and never once asking for recognition." He paused. "Tonight, she's given me permission to introduce her. Because the $8 million expansion requires congregational approval, and she believes you deserve to know who is investing in your community." My mother's hand tightened on my knee, not because she knew, because something in the pastor's tone had activated a frequency she couldn't identify yet. "Tonight, I am honored to tell you that the benefactor behind Crane Philanthropic Ventures, the woman who saved our church, funded our scholarships, and is now proposing an $8 million expansion of our community programs, is sitting in this sanctuary right now. Pastor Reeves looked directly at me. She's been here all along. Isabel Crane. Please stand. 300 heads turned. Again. But this time, the expression on their faces wasn't pity. The silence lasted exactly 4 seconds. I counted. Then the sanctuary exploded, not with polite applause, with the full-throated, feet-stomping, tears-streaming eruption of 300 people processing a revelation that rewrote everything they thought they knew about the quiet woman in the 4th pew. I stood up. My mother's hand was still on my knee. I could feel it trembling. She was looking up at me with an expression I'd never seen on her face. Not shock, not pride, not confusion. Something that contained all three and none of them. Something raw and fundamental. The expression of a woman realizing that the daughter she'd been praying for was the answer to every prayer the church had ever made. "Isabel," she whispered, but the sanctuary was too loud for anyone else to hear. The applause continued. People were standing. Frank Mueller was wiping his eyes. Pastor Reeves was smiling with the relief of a man who'd carried a secret for 18 months and was finally setting it down. I stood there in my simple navy dress and flats, receiving something I'd never asked for and didn't know I needed. Recognition. Not for the money, for the intention behind it. For 11 years of building something that existed solely to help. Ryan was on his feet. His attorney brain was processing information at a speed his emotions couldn't match. His face was cycling through expressions like a slot machine that couldn't land on a result. Melissa had both hands over her mouth, tears running down her face. 300 people I'd sat beside for years. People who'd smiled politely at me, who'd offered career advice and prayer and gentle encouragement, were now looking at me like I'd just been translated from background character to protagonist in the story of their own community. Pastor Reeves raised his hand and the applause gradually subsided. "Isabel," he said, "would you like to say something?" I hadn't prepared remarks. I hadn't expected the prayer request. I hadn't expected any of this to feel the way it felt. But I walked to the pulpit because my grandmother's letter was in my wallet, and there were things that needed to be said. "I'm not good at this part," I began. "The building things, the funding things, the quiet work. That's easy. Standing here is the hard part." A few people laughed, warmly. 11 years ago, my grandmother left me a letter and an idea. She believed that wealth should flow toward need, not away from it. That generosity shouldn't require a gala or a press release or a name on a building. That the best gifts are the ones nobody sees coming. I looked at my mother. She was crying, not quietly. "Mom," I said, and 300 people watched a daughter speak to her mother from a pulpit in a church that both of them loved. "You asked people to pray for my career tonight." She nodded, unable to speak. "My career is Crane Philanthropic Ventures. We manage $3.8 billion in assets. We've distributed over $1.2 billion to communities in 23 countries. We fund schools, clinics, churches, disaster relief, and scholarship programs." I paused. "And this church, the one you've attended every Sunday for 30 years, is standing because of a $5 million donation from your daughter. The daughter you just asked people to pray for. The sound my mother made was not a word. It was the sound of 34 years of assumptions collapsing into a single breath. It was the sound of a mother discovering that the child she'd been worried about was the one she should have been most proud of. It was the sound of grace, actual grace, the kind you can't rehearse. I wasn't hiding from you, I continued. I was protecting the work. Philanthropy done loudly becomes about the philanthropist. I wanted it to be about the people, about the 14 kids who got scholarships, about the families who use the community center, about the congregation that doesn't have to worry about foreclosure anymore. That's what mattered, not my name. The second standing ovation was longer than the first. Ryan was clapping so hard his hands were red. Melissa was openly sobbing. Frank Mueller was nodding with the satisfaction of a man who'd kept a secret beautifully and was glad it was over. My mother stood up. She walked to the pulpit. She didn't say anything. She just hugged me. In front of 300 people who were crying and clapping and experiencing the kind of Christmas Eve moments that pastors spend their entire careers hoping to create. I prayed for you, she whispered in my ear. You were the answer to every prayer I ever made, I whispered back. I just didn't need you to know that. The service continued. Pastor Reeves delivered his Christmas message. The congregation voted unanimously to approve the expansion project. 14 scholarship recipients who were in attendance stood up and were recognized. The community center director shared statistics about families served, and through all of it, my mother held my hand in the pew and didn't let go. After the service, the receiving line lasted 90 minutes. Every member of the congregation wanted to speak with me, to thank me, to share stories about how the scholarship had changed their daughter's life, how the community center had provided meals during their husband's unemployment, how the church renovation had given them a place that felt like home when everything else was falling apart. A woman I'd never spoken to before took my hand and held it with both of hers. My son graduated because of your scholarship, she said. He's the first person in our family to finish college. I didn't know who to thank. Now I do. A retired teacher who volunteered at the community center 3 days a week stood in front of me with tears in his eyes. We serve 300 families a month in that kitchen, he said. Do you know what that means? It means 300 families who don't go hungry because of you, because of someone who sat in these pews and we never knew. These conversations went on for 90 minutes, each one a thread in a tapestry I'd been weaving for 11 years without ever seeing the full picture. I'd known the numbers, the statistics, the impact reports, but I'd never stood face to face with the impact and let it look me in the eyes. My grandmother was right. This was why anonymity mattered, because the moment wasn't about me. It was about them, about 300 people discovering that the help they'd received had a face, and that face had been sitting among them all along. Ryan found me near the end of the line. His tie was loosened. His attorney composure was gone. He looked like his younger self, the brother I'd grown up with before careers and titles had built walls between us. $3.8 billion, he said. You manage $3.8 billion, and you gave away $1.2 billion of it, more than you'll earn in 10 lifetimes as an attorney, I said. But I said it without edge, because it wasn't about comparison. It was about correction. "Why philanthropy?" he asked. "Why not just make money like everyone else?" "Because Grandma asked me to prove that wealth and generosity aren't opposites," I said. She was right. They're not. They're the same thing if you do it correctly. He hugged me. In the middle of a church lobby, surrounded by people whose lives I'd changed without them knowing, my brother hugged me and said 3 words he'd never said before. "I'm proud of you." Not of the money, he added, of the mission. That's the first time anyone in this family has said that, I told him. Then we've been failing you, he said, and you've been saving us anyway. My mother rode home in my car, my old Honda Civic, that she'd been gently suggesting I replace for 5 years. She sat in the passenger seat, staring through the windshield at the Christmas lights lining the streets. "This car," she said. "Practical," I replied. She laughed. It was watery and raw and real. "I asked 300 people to pray for your career." "You did," I confirmed, "while sitting in a church you paid for." She laughed harder, the kind of laughter that releases something held too tightly for too long. At my parents' house, Christmas Eve continued with the usual traditions: hot chocolate, gift exchange, my father's annual reading of a holiday poem. But the energy was different. The air had been cleaned of something stale, something that had been accumulating for years. The assumption that success was visible, that failure was quiet, and that the people you prayed for were never the ones who'd already answered the prayer. My mother gave me my Christmas gift early, a framed photograph of my grandmother. On the back, she'd written, "She would have been so proud." I looked at the photograph, my grandmother's face, kind and determined and full of the quiet conviction that had shaped everything I'd built. "She is," I said. 2 months later, the expansion broke ground. I stood at the ceremony beside Pastor Reeves, Frank Mueller, and my mother, who had appointed herself the unofficial project ambassador and was telling everyone within earshot about her daughter's foundation. She'd gone from praying for my career to promoting it in 60 days. Growth takes many forms. The news spread beyond the congregation within days. A local newspaper ran a feature on the anonymous benefactor revealed. The Hartford Courant picked it up. Then a regional business journal. Then Bloomberg. Because $3.8 billion in philanthropic assets was a number that made financial journalists pay attention, regardless of the context. The coverage was different from anything I'd experienced. It wasn't about me as a businesswoman. It was about the model. Philanthropic venture capital, one journalist called it. The idea that you could build a wealth management firm whose primary output wasn't returns for investors, but impact for communities. 3 universities contacted me about studying the model. 2 other foundations asked to replicate it. A congressman invited me to testify about philanthropic innovation. I declined the testimony. I accepted the university partnerships. The model was the point, not the founder. My grandmother would have approved. My father, who had been characteristically quiet during the Christmas Eve revelation, processing information the way retired engineers process information, through analysis rather than emotion, finally called me 2 weeks into January. He'd spent those 2 weeks reading every public document he could find about Crane Philanthropic Ventures. He'd built a spreadsheet. He'd modeled the returns. He'd traced the charitable distributions across 23 countries. "Isabel," he said, "your compounding model is extraordinary. The 40 to 60 split between philanthropy and reinvestment shouldn't work at this scale, but you made it work." "Thank you, Dad. That means a lot coming from you." "I'm not finished," he said. "I spent 40 years as an engineer building things, bridges, systems, structures. I thought building was my domain. But you built something I couldn't have conceived. Not because you're smarter than me, because you're more generous." And generosity, it turns out, is its own kind of engineering. That was the most my father had ever said about feelings in my entire life. I saved it. The scholarships expanded to 32 recipients. The community kitchen served 400 families per month. The counseling center opened with a waiting list that broke my heart and motivated my next funding allocation. And every Sunday, I sat in the fourth pew. Same seat, same simple dress, same quiet presence. But now, when the prayer request came, my mother stood up with a different kind of announcement. "I'd like to thank God," she said one Sunday, "for answering prayers in ways we never expect, and for daughters who build cathedrals while their mothers worry about them." 300 people laughed. I smiled. And somewhere, my grandmother's letter sat in my wallet, its edges worn from 11 years of carrying. Build something that makes money and gives it away at the same time. Prove that wealth and generosity aren't opposites. Done, Grandma, done. Because the real secret of success isn't the $3.8 billion. It's not the 23 countries or the 147 organizations or the church that almost closed. The real secret is that the most powerful thing you can build is something that outlives your anonymity, something that exists whether people know your name or not, something that makes 300 people stand on their feet, not because of who you are, but because of what you gave. And sometimes the greatest answer to a prayer is the person everyone's praying for. My brother ordered a second glass of champagne and made sure I watched him drink it. He held the flute at exactly the angle where the light caught it, took a slow sip, and exhaled with the theatrical satisfaction of a man who believed luxury was a personality trait. "This is why you work hard," he said, gesturing at the first-class lounge around us. Leather chairs, complimentary bar, actual food, not whatever they serve in economy. He looked at me with the expression he'd been perfecting since childhood, the one that mixed affection with pity in proportions that made both useless. "No offense, May, but you really don't belong here." He said it casually, like a weather observation, like pointing out that it was raining and I'd forgotten an umbrella. A statement of fact about the natural order of things. My name is May Chen. I'm 33 years old, and I was sitting in the first-class lounge at JFK International Airport on the day after Christmas, wearing a plain black hoodie, leggings, and sneakers, holding a boarding pass that my brother assumed I'd somehow scammed my way into. I hadn't scammed anything. My mother had upgraded my ticket as a Christmas gift because she felt sorry for me, which was arguably worse. Our family was flying to Miami for my parents' 40th wedding anniversary trip, a week at a resort that my brother, Grant, had chosen and booked because Grant chose and booked everything. He was the family's designated success story. 37 years old, senior vice president at a private equity firm in Manhattan, the kind of man who said things like deal flow and value creation at Thanksgiving dinner and expected applause. His wife, Tamsin, sat beside him in the lounge wearing a cashmere travel set that cost more than my monthly rent. She was scrolling through her phone with the detached serenity of a woman whose problems were exclusively first world. My parents, Richard and Lily Chen, occupied the adjacent seats. My father was reading the Financial Times. My mother was watching me, with that specific parental radar that detected unhappiness, even when none existed. My younger sister Amy, a pediatric dentist, was FaceTiming her boyfriend from the corner. 12 family members total, all in first class, all dressed in the casual elegance of people who traveled well and often. Except me. I was in a hoodie and sneakers because I was comfortable, not because I couldn't afford cashmere. But nobody at this gate knew that. What my family didn't know, what I had spent 9 years ensuring they could never discover through any casual observation, was that the woman in the black hoodie managed a private aviation and luxury hospitality empire worth $4.2 billion. That the company I'd built from nothing, Skyline Holdings, owned a fleet of 43 private jets, 14 boutique hotels, 6 luxury resorts, and 3 commercial real estate portfolios spanning 19 countries. That I was, according to a Forbes list published 6 weeks ago that nobody in my family read, the 11th wealthiest self-made woman under 40 in America. And that in approximately 20 minutes, the director of aviation operations for this airport's private terminal was going to walk into this first-class lounge looking for me, because my personal aircraft had been serviced and was fueled and ready on the tarmac. Not a first-class seat on a commercial airline, a private jet, one of 43 that I owned. But for now, I was the sister who didn't belong in first class. Grant was still talking. He'd moved from champagne commentary to a broader lecture on the economics of air travel. First class is a mindset, he was explaining to Tamsin, who was clearly not listening, but had learned to nod at strategic intervals. It's about investing in yourself, in your comfort, in the statement you make when you walk onto a plane. He glanced at me. Economy is for people who've accepted limitations. First class is for people who've transcended them. Tamsin nodded. Strategic interval achieved. My mother, sensing the direction of the conversation, intervened gently. Grant, May is perfectly happy in her seat. I upgraded her because it's a family trip. I'm fine, Mom, I said. Grant raised his hands in mock surrender. I'm not saying anything. I'm just observing that some people invest in their lifestyle and some people... He paused, searching for a diplomatic way to say what he actually meant. Don't, Tamsin supplied helpfully. Grant pointed at her. Exactly. No judgment. I took a sip of water. The lounge's complimentary water. I could have been drinking their most expensive champagne, and it wouldn't have registered in my monthly expenses as anything more than a decimal point. But I liked water. It kept me clear. My phone buzzed, a text from my Chief Operating Officer, James Montague, who was currently at Skyline Holdings Operations Center in Manhattan. Heads up, Director of Private Aviation at JFK is looking for you. Your G650 maintenance was completed early. They need authorization to move it to the departure pad. Also, the Miami resort team confirmed your parents' anniversary suite, presidential level, complimentary, per your instructions. I typed back, tell the director I'll be at the private terminal in 30 minutes, and make sure the resort doesn't mention my name. The suite is from an anonymous benefactor. He replied, you're sitting in a first-class lounge while your jet waits on the tarmac. The irony is not lost on me. I smiled at my phone. Grant noticed. What's so funny? Nothing, I said. A friend sent me something. He turned back to his champagne. The story of how I built a $4.2 billion aviation and hospitality empire while my family thought I was a struggling travel agent starts with a red-eye flight and a broken seat. At 24, fresh from Cornell's hospitality management program, I was working as a junior coordinator at a mid-sized travel agency in Queens. The pay was modest. The work was repetitive, but I was learning something that most people in the hospitality industry never bothered to understand: the gap. The gap between what wealthy travelers expected and what the industry actually delivered. Private aviation was fragmented, inconsistent, and shockingly outdated. Hotel experiences at the luxury level were cookie cutter. The wealthiest people in the world were paying premium prices for mediocre service because nobody had bothered to build something truly exceptional. I saw the gap the way an architect sees an empty lot, full of possibility, full of structure that didn't exist yet but should. I started Skyline Holdings with $55,000 in savings and a single client, a tech executive who'd been frustrated with every private aviation broker he'd tried. I didn't own a jet. I didn't own anything. What I did was broker a charter for him at 30% below market rate by negotiating directly with aircraft operators and cutting out 3 layers of middlemen. He flew round trip to London for $40,000 less than his usual cost. His experience was flawless. I'd personally coordinated every detail, from the ground transportation to the in-flight catering to the hotel at the other end. He told 2 friends. They told 4. Within a year, I had 40 clients and $3 million in annual revenue from brokerage commissions alone. But brokerage was the beginning, not the destination. I used the commissions to acquire my first aircraft, a pre-owned Learjet that I bought at auction for $2.1 million, refurbished with borrowed money and put into service at rates that undercut every competitor in the Northeast. It was profitable within 4 months. The second jet followed 6 months later, then a third, then 5 more. By year 4, I owned 12 aircraft and had expanded into luxury hospitality, acquiring a distressed boutique hotel in Aspen that I renovated and relaunched as the first property in what would become Skyline's hotel portfolio. The growth was exponential because the model was simple. Control the entire experience. Don't broker, own. Own the jets, own the hotels, own the ground transportation. Own every touch point between the moment a client decides to travel and the moment they return home. Remove every source of friction, every point of mediocrity. Create something seamless. By year 7, Skyline Holdings had 43 jets, 14 hotels, 6 resorts, and commercial real estate in 19 countries. Revenue was $890 million annually. The company was valued at $4.2 billion in our most recent private assessment. And I'd maintained my anonymity with the same discipline I applied to everything else. Skyline's founder was listed as M. Chen in regulatory filings. No public appearances, no interviews, no society pages. The luxury world knew Skyline as the gold standard. They didn't know it was built by a woman in a black hoodie who let her family buy her economy upgrades to first class. The anonymity served a dual purpose. In the luxury space, mystique is currency. Clients chose Skyline partly because its founder was unknown. The brand felt exclusive, untouchable, above the noise. And personally, the anonymity protected me from my family's particular brand of involvement. Grant would have tried to invest. My father would have offered advice about an industry he knew nothing about. My mother would have told every person she knew. Amy would have wanted free flights. The company would have become a family project, and family projects in the Chen household were always managed by Grant. Everything was managed by Grant. But not this. Not today. 12:47 p.m. The flight was scheduled to board at 1:15. My family was settling into the lounge routine. Grant was on his laptop, probably reviewing deal sheets. Tamsin was napping elegantly. My parents were sharing a scone. Amy was still on FaceTime. And I was watching the lounge entrance, waiting for the moment that would end 9 years of silence. The private aviation director's name was Caroline Voss. I had worked with her for 3 years. She managed the private terminal at JFK and oversaw all VIP aircraft operations. She knew who I was. She knew what I owned. And she texted me 10 minutes ago that she needed to deliver the aircraft readiness confirmation in person because the digital authorization system was down for maintenance. She was coming to the first-class commercial lounge to find me in front of my family. I could have prevented it. I could have told her I'd come to the private terminal. I could have handled it by phone. But something about Grant's champagne and his statement about belonging had shifted something inside me. Not anger. Something quieter. Readiness. 12:52 p.m. Through the lounge's glass walls, I saw Caroline approaching. She was in her airline uniform, a crisp navy blazer with the airport's VIP services insignia. She carried a leather portfolio that contained aircraft documentation. She walked with the purposeful stride of a woman whose job involved managing the travel arrangements of billionaires. Grant noticed her first. He always noticed authority figures. He straightened in his chair instinctively, the way men do when someone who outranks them enters a room. Caroline entered the lounge, scanned the room, and found me. She smiled, a professional, warm smile that communicated recognition and respect. She walked directly toward me, passing Grant without acknowledging him. "Miss Chen," she said, "good afternoon. I apologize for the intrusion. Your Gulfstream G650 has completed maintenance ahead of schedule. We have it fueled and positioned at Gate 7 of the private terminal. I just need your authorization to move it to the departure pad." She opened the leather portfolio and placed it on the table in front of me. The top page read, Skyline Holdings, Aircraft Authorization. Owner, M. Chen. Aircraft, Gulfstream G650ER. Registration, N-SKY1. Status, ready for departure. The silence around me was absolute. Grant's champagne glass was frozen midair. Tamsin had opened her eyes. My father had set down the Financial Times. My mother's scone was suspended between her hand and her mouth. Amy had ended her FaceTime call without saying goodbye. I signed the authorization. "Thank you, Caroline. We won't be departing until later this evening. Can you have the crew on standby from 6 p.m.? "Of course, Miss Chen. Your usual catering preferences?" She glanced at her portfolio. "The Japanese fusion menu with the 2018 Montrachet?" "That's perfect," I said. "Thank you." She closed the portfolio, nodded respectfully, and turned to leave. Then she paused. Oh, and the presidential suite at your Miami property has been prepared per your specifications. The staff is expecting your family this evening. My property. The words hung in the lounge like smoke from an expensive cigar. My Miami property. Caroline left. The lounge remained frozen. I picked up my water and took a sip. Grant set down his champagne glass with a click that sounded like a gunshot in the silence. A Gulfstream G650, he said. His voice was flat, thin, the voice of a man whose entire framework for understanding the world had just been formatted and wiped. Yes, I said, yours, mine. He looked at the authorization form still sitting on the table. My name, my company, my aircraft. Skyline Holdings, he said. He knew the name. Everyone in the luxury world knew the name. The jets, the hotels, the resorts. That's you. That's been me for 9 years, I said. My father picked up the authorization form and studied it with the careful attention of a man who'd spent his life reading financial documents. M. Chen, he read. May Chen. He looked at me over his reading glasses. How much? The company was privately valued at $4.2 billion 6 months ago, I said. I'm the sole owner. My mother set down her scone, very slowly, like it had become too heavy to hold. You own a jet, she said. I own 43 jets, I corrected gently, and 14 hotels, and 6 resorts. And the resort where we're staying this week in Miami is one of them. I booked the presidential suite for your anniversary as a gift from the anonymous benefactor you were so touched by. That's me too. My mother burst into tears. Not sad tears, not even happy tears. The kind of tears that happen when your entire understanding of your child undergoes a complete renovation in the span of 60 seconds. Amy, who had the fastest processing speed of anyone in the family, started laughing. Oh my God, she said. You own the resort? We're staying at your hotel? And Grant just told you that you don't belong in first class? She laughed harder. Because you don't. You belong in a private jet. Grant hadn't moved. His champagne sat untouched. His laptop screen had gone dark. His entire identity, the family's designated success, the man who explained the economics of air travel to people he considered beneath him, was recalibrating against data he couldn't dispute. You sat in this lounge, he said slowly, while your private jet was parked on the tarmac 50 yards away. I did, I confirmed, drinking complimentary water while you drank champagne and told me I didn't belong here. He closed his eyes. First class is for people who've transcended limitations, he quoted himself. That's what I said, 20 minutes before your private jet handler arrived. The word transcended had never sounded so small. Tamsin was looking at me with an expression I'd never seen from her. Respect, possibly, or recalculation. Hard to tell with Tamsin. How, my father said. The single word contained every question he couldn't formulate. I built it, I said, from nothing. $55,000 and one client, 9 years ago, while you all thought I was working at a travel agency. Grant opened his eyes. The travel agency. That was a cover? It was real for the first 6 months, I said. Then it became a useful explanation that nobody ever questioned because it confirmed what everyone already believed about me. He stood up and walked to the window. Through the glass, the tarmac stretched out in both directions. Somewhere out there among the commercial aircraft sat a Gulfstream G650ER with the Skyline Holdings logo on the tail. His sister's jet. One of 43. I've spent my entire career in private equity, he said to the window. I evaluate companies for a living. I assess value. I identify potential. He turned back. And I missed a $4.2 billion company built by the person sitting next to me at Christmas dinner every year. You weren't looking, I said. Because you already decided what you saw. You saw a woman in a hoodie and sneakers, and you calculated her value at 0. That's not assessment, that's assumption. And it's the most expensive mistake you've ever made. Not in money, in time. 9 years of not knowing your sister. He didn't respond. His jaw was working the way it did when he was processing something that didn't fit his models. My mother had stopped crying and was now holding my hand with a grip that suggested she might never let go. Why didn't you tell us? She asked. Because of what happened 10 minutes ago, I said. Grant told me I don't belong in first class. Dad's reading the Financial Times looking for success stories he could be sitting next to. Amy's on FaceTime because this family's dynamics bore her. And you upgraded my ticket out of pity. I looked at each of them. If I told you 9 years ago, Grant would have tried to manage it. Dad would have tried to advise it. Mom, you would have told everyone at church. And it would have stopped being mine and started being ours. I needed it to be mine. My mother's grip tightened. I'm sorry, she said, for the pity upgrade. I smiled. The upgrade was sweet, Mom. It's the pity I could have done without. Amy hugged me from behind. I want a free flight, she said immediately. Then, I'm kidding. Kind of. Not really. I laughed. Amy was the only person in this family who had never once made me feel less than. She'd earned her flight. My father folded the Financial Times and set it on the table with a finality that suggested he might never read it the same way again. May, he said, I've spent my whole life reading about successful people. He looked at me with eyes that were red and bright and honest. I should have been reading about my daughter. We boarded the commercial first-class flight to Miami at 1:15 p.m., all 12 of us. Grant was quiet the entire flight, not sulking, processing. Tamsin asked me 3 questions about the hotel industry that were surprisingly intelligent. Amy fell asleep on my shoulder. My parents held hands and didn't speak, which was their version of deep emotional processing. When we landed in Miami, a black SUV was waiting on the tarmac. Not at the terminal, on the tarmac. The driver held a sign that read, Ms. Chen, Skyline Holdings. My mother gasped. Grant stared. I walked toward it. The driver opened the door. Welcome home, Ms. Chen, he said. It's a phrase I heard a dozen times a day at my properties around the world. But this time, with my family watching, it meant something different. It meant the hiding was over. The resort was everything I designed it to be. My parents' presidential suite overlooked the ocean. Fresh flowers, personalized welcome letters, their favorite wine chilled and waiting. The staff addressed me by name as we walked through the lobby. The general manager appeared and shook my hand. Ms. Chen, it's wonderful to have you and your family with us. Everything is prepared as you requested. My mother walked through the lobby, touching surfaces like she was verifying their reality. My daughter built this, she whispered to the front desk agent, who smiled and said, "Yes, ma'am. She built all of it." That night at the anniversary dinner I'd arranged on the hotel's private beach, my father stood to give a toast. 40 years ago, I married the woman who changed my life, he said, holding my mother's hand. Tonight, I want to acknowledge the woman who changed how I see the world. He looked at me. May, you built something extraordinary. Not just the company, the lesson. You taught me that the person I was proudest of wasn't always the one I should have been watching. And the person I worried about most was the one who needed my worry least. He raised his glass. To the woman who doesn't belong in first class, because she belongs in her own jet. Everyone drank. Grant raised his glass last. His eyes met mine across the candlelit table, and in them, I saw something I'd been waiting 9 years to see. Not envy, not competition. Understanding. He stood up. I owe my sister an apology that's bigger than a toast, he said. But I'll start with this. He looked at me directly. You don't belong in first class. You were right about that, May. I was wrong about why. The laughter that followed was warm and real and tasted like salt air and possibility. The week in Miami was transformative, not just for the family dynamic, but for each person individually. Grant spent 3 days shadowing the resort's general manager, asking questions about operations, staffing, revenue models. His private equity brain was fascinated by the business. But more than that, he was fascinated by the philosophy. On the 4th day, he found me by the pool with my laptop, reviewing fleet maintenance schedules. "Can I ask you something?" he said, sitting in the lounge chair beside me. "You've been asking me things for 3 days. One more won't hurt." "When did you stop being angry at me?" I closed the laptop. "Who says I stopped?" He looked stricken. "I'm kidding," I said. "Mostly. I stopped being angry about 5 years ago. Anger is expensive. It takes energy I'd rather spend on building." He was quiet for a moment. "I've been thinking about what you said, about assumption versus assessment. I built my career on evaluating companies, finding hidden value, and I walked past the most valuable person in my life every Christmas without seeing her. That's not a professional failure, Grant. It's a personal one." "You're right," I said, "but you're here now, and the view is pretty good from this side." He smiled. For the first time in my adult memory, it wasn't performative. It was just his face, being honest. Amy used the week to interview every department head at the resort. She took notes in a journal she'd bought at the gift shop. By the end of the trip, she'd written a 30-page analysis of Skyline's hospitality model and presented it to me over breakfast on the last morning. It was better than half the consulting reports I'd paid for. I offered her a job. She said she'd think about it. 3 months later, she joined Skyline as Director of Guest Experience. She was spectacular at it. Turns out, understanding children's teeth gives you excellent insight into managing adults' expectations. Both populations are anxious, easily frustrated, and respond well to patience and clear communication. My father started reading about aviation, not casually, with the systematic intensity of an engineer learning a new field. He called me every week with questions about jet acquisition economics, maintenance cost structures, and fleet utilization rates. He built a spreadsheet comparing Skyline's operational efficiency to publicly traded aviation companies. We outperformed all of them. He sent me the spreadsheet with a single note. Your grandmother would have built the same thing. She just didn't have the tools. My mother became the unofficial ambassador for the resort. She told everyone. Church friends, neighbors, the mailman, the woman who cut her hair. My daughter owns this, she'd say, showing photos on her phone to anyone within arm's reach. It was embarrassing and wonderful, and exactly what mothers do when they finally have something to brag about. The Forbes profile ran 8 weeks after our Miami trip. The headline called me the invisible mogul of luxury travel. The water was warm. The stars were absurd. That hoodie you wore at the airport, she said, you own a $4.2 billion company and you wear a hoodie to travel? Comfort over performance, I said. She linked her arm through mine. Your grandmother used to say something like that. She said the richest people she knew were the ones who didn't need you to know they were rich. I stopped walking. Grandma said that? Every time your grandfather bought a new car, she'd say it. She squeezed my arm. I think she'd understand exactly why you kept quiet. And I think she'd be proud that you finally let us in. We walked in silence for a while, 2 women on a beach that one of them owned, watching waves that didn't care about net worth or first-class lounges or brothers with champagne opinions. Sometimes the person who doesn't belong in first class is the person who outgrew it years ago. Sometimes the hoodie is more honest than the cashmere, and sometimes the most powerful thing you can do in a room full of people who've underestimated you is sit quietly, drink your water, and wait for the director of aviation to walk in and call you by name. Not because you need the recognition, but because the people who love you deserve to see who you really are, even if it takes a Gulf Stream to get their attention. On my wedding day, not a single family member showed up, not even my father, who promised to walk me down the aisle. They all went for my sister's baby shower. A day later, I posted one picture on Instagram. Less than an hour after that single post, I received 47 missed calls and text messages from them. What could have shaken them so suddenly? Keep watching to find out. They thought they were choosing the winning side in a family rivalry they invented themselves, but they forgot that the game was rigged from the start, just not in the way they assumed. My name is Carol, and for my entire life, I've been the understudy to my sister Iris's one-woman show. Our family operates less like a cohesive unit and more like a badly managed hedge fund, with my mother Kim as the frantic CEO and Iris as the sole high-risk asset. Iris did everything right, according to the unwritten bylaws of our clan. She married a man named Noah, whose family name Davenport carried the faint, musty aroma of generational wealth, even if the reality was closer to generational mortgages. They lived in a house where the hedges were sculpted into anxious spirals, and the conversations were just as rigidly controlled. Her life was a carefully staged production, and my family were the financial backers, perpetually applauding and hoping for a return on their emotional investment. I, on the other hand, was the off-book venture they never understood. I chose a different path. I chose Peter. Peter doesn't have a surname that gets him preferential tea times. He has hands that are stained with ink and graphite, hands that bring worlds to life. He's a comic book artist, a storyteller who works from a small, sun-drenched studio at the back of our rented cottage, a space that smells of paper and possibility. To me, that scent is the fragrance of creation. To my family, it was the reek of financial instability. They saw his worn jeans and his intense, quiet focus, not as the uniform of a dedicated artist, but as the telltale signs of a man allergic to a real career. They couldn't fathom a life that wasn't benchmarked by promotions and property values. When I announced our engagement, the response was less joyful celebration and more a collective, mournful sigh. My mother, Beatrice, deployed her signature look of pained disappointment, perfected over years of my minor rebellions. "Nina, my dear," she'd lament, "it's lovely that you found someone who shares your creative inclinations, but one cannot frame inclinations and hang them on the wall of a house you can't afford." My sister Iris was more direct, her sympathy as thin and brittle as a sugar glass window. "I just worry about you," she'd cuh, inspecting her flawless manicure. "It's a difficult world without a proper foundation." Her foundation was a trust fund that my father refilled with the predictability of a tide every time Noah's latest investment opportunity turned out to be a financial sinkhole. The ultimate power play was the scheduling. Iris, with a theatrical display of regret she must have rehearsed for weeks, announced her elaborate gender reveal party for the exact same Saturday as my wedding. It was a tactical masterstroke of social warfare, a loyalty test presented as an unfortunate coincidence, and the family, with the Lemming-like predictability I'd come to expect, chose. They chose the promise of a Davenport heir and the spectacle of a cannon shooting colored powder over the quiet, solemn vows of a daughter they had long since written off as a lost cause. My father, Jeffrey, the man who taught me how to read, had promised me he would be there. "I'll be there to walk you down the aisle, my girl," he'd said, his eyes meeting mine with what I mistook for sincerity. "I'll just have to slip away from the party for an hour or so." He never came. The day of the wedding, my phone became a monument to their united front of indifference. I sat in the small anteroom of the charming ivy-covered chapel we'd booked, a bride in waiting, watching the clock hands creep towards the hour. One by one the texts arrived, each a perfectly crafted little dagger of polite abandonment. "So sorry, darling. Iris is feeling a bit overwhelmed and needs me from my mother. Noah's parents have cornered us. Impossible to get away from my aunt and from my father." The final gutting blow. "Things are really celebratory here. So sorry. Your sister's moment is very important to us all." Each message was a tiny, perfect encapsulation of my role in the family. An afterthought, a secondary concern, an obligation to be regretfully canneled. They weren't just missing my wedding. They were publicly ratifying my irrelevance. The ceremony was set for 4 o'clock. At 10 minutes to, I was staring at my reflection, a bride with no one to present her. That's when Mr. Andrew found me. He was our landlord, a retired diplomat who lived in the main house in front of the cottage Peter and I rented. He had come to the chapel to offer his well wishes and drop off a gift. He found me, not in tears, but in a state of icy calm. My phone face up on the small table beside me. Its screen a damning list of unanswered pleas to Mother, Father, and Iris. He saw the screen, his gaze taking in the litany of my family's betrayal. He was a man accustomed to observing without commenting, his kind, intelligent eyes missing nothing. He looked at my dress, at my solitary figure, then down at his own impeccably tailored suit. "Nah," he said, his voice imbued with a gentle authority that brooked no argument. "It would be my profound honor if you would permit me to escort you." And so I was walked down the aisle, not by the father who forsook me, but by the dignified gentleman who collected our rent. The wedding was intimate, but it was filled with a palpable warmth. Our small circle of friends celebrated with an enthusiasm that filled the void my family had left. Peter's eyes, full of a love that needed no validation, were all the family I needed in that moment. After the ceremony, as we mingled with our guests, Mr. Andrew approached us. I happened to overhear that a honeymoon was not in the immediate plans, he said, his expression one of gentle inquiry. We had, of course, prioritized securing the lease on Peter's new, larger studio space over a vacation. "That is a situation that must be rectified," he said, with a decisive nod. He took out his phone and made a brief call. "Jonathan," he said, his tone familiar and easy. "Davy's here. I'm calling about that young artist I introduced you to, the one who designed the graphic novel adaptation of your grandfather's journals. Well, he has just gotten married. Yes, a lovely girl. Wonderful. My sincerest thanks." He ended the call and turned to us, a twinkle in his eye. "An old friend of mine, Donald Blackman, has a private vessel. He insists you make use of it for the next fortnight as his personal wedding gift. His crew is on standby." Donald Blackman. The name resonated. A famously private philanthropist and historian. Peter had taken on a passion project for him, a commission to visually tell the story of Parrish's ancestors' expeditions, a job he'd done for a nominal fee because the story captivated him. He had treated the reclusive tycoon's family history with the same reverence he gave his own characters, and now that reverence was being repaid in a way we could never have imagined. The next day, Peter and I stood on the deck of a sailing yacht, so elegant it looked like it was carved from moonlight. A flute of champagne in my hand, watching the coastline dissolve into a hazy blue line. I took out my phone, captured the moment, and posted a single photograph of Peter and me, our hands clasped with the impossible blue of the deep ocean stretching out behind us. The caption was a simple declarative statement: "The adventure begins." The transmission had been sent not as an act of revenge, but as a declaration of independence. My old life had been a supporting role. My new one was the lead. 15 minutes later, my phone's screen became a frantic web of calls and desperate messages. I silenced them all. In the end, there were 417 missed calls and text messages. The first call I chose to answer came 3 days into our voyage. After the barrage of notifications had become a running joke between Peter and me, it was my mother, Kim. I let the phone ring until the last possible moment, a small reclamation of control in a lifetime of acquiescence. When I answered, I remained silent. allowing the vast, empty space of the ocean to fill the connection. Carol? Is that you? Carol, for goodness sake, where are you? We have been beside ourselves with worry. The performance was so breathtaking in its dishonesty that it was almost admirable. They weren't worried. They were mystified. They were outraged. They were confronting a narrative they couldn't control, and it was driving them to distraction. "I'm on my honeymoon, Mother," I said, my voice as placid and steady as the horizon. I could hear Iris in the background, her voice a sharp, impatient hiss. "Ask her where she got that boat. Ask her who is paying for it." My mother's tone pivoted instantly from manufactured concern to pointed cross-examination. A honeymoon on a vessel of that magnitude. Your sister saw the pictures. We are all quite perplexed. Did Peter's family have resources you failed to mention? It would have been helpful to know. There it was, the frantic scrabbling for a logical foothold for any explanation that would keep their neatly constructed universe from flying apart. They needed Peter to be a secret heir, a trust fund kid playing at being a bohemian, because the alternative, that they had made a colossal error in judgment based on their own superficial criteria, was an existential threat. They had to be the victims of my secrecy, not the authors of their own exclusion. This was the pivotal moment, the conversational endgame I had been unknowingly preparing for my entire life. I took a slow sip of my drink, watching a pod of dolphins arc gracefully through the waves. "No, Mother," I said, letting the simple denial expand in the silence. "Peter doesn't have a hidden fortune. He has something far more valuable, something your world doesn't have a column for in its ledger. Talent and a reputation for excellence. And those qualities, it turns out, are their own form of currency among people who matter." The silence on the other end was so profound, I could almost hear the gears of her mind seizing up. I continued, my voice deliberately light and conversational. "The yacht belongs to a gentleman named Donald Blackman. He's one of Peter's clients. He was so moved by the way Peter brought his family's history to life that he offered this trip as a personal wedding present. It was all arranged by Mr. Andrew." The sound my mother made was a faint, strangled noise, like a balloon slowly deflating. Mr. Andrew, the landlord, the quiet, polite man they had dismissed as a functional part of the background, like a lamppost or a mailbox. The notion that this man, this figure from the periphery of my supposedly small life, could casually command the favor of a man like Parrish was a paradigm-shifting revelation. It violated the fundamental laws of their social physics. It wasn't about the money you had. It was about the respect you commanded, a concept they had never bothered to learn. "Mr. Andrew," she repeated, the name sounding like a word in a foreign language she was struggling to pronounce. "The man who owned your cottage?" "The very same," I confirmed. "The man who graciously stepped in to walk me down the aisle when my own father was otherwise engaged with a cannon full of colored powder." It's remarkable, isn't it? When you consistently treat people with decency and respect, regardless of their perceived net worth, they tend to remember it. You and Father should try it sometime. I could hear Iris in the background, her voice no longer a hiss, but a full-blown squawk of indignation. "This is ridiculous. This is a setup. She planned this. She did this deliberately to make us look bad. She did this to humiliate us. I smiled, a real, genuine smile. I have to go now, Mother. The crew has just spotted a migrating whale, and I don't want to miss it. Give my best to the family. I disconnected the call before the sputtering could begin. Cutting the final thread with a clean, satisfying snip, I turned to Peter, who was sketching the distant shadow of the whale in his notebook, his focus absolute. For years, my family had made me feel like an apology. They had appraised my husband based on the ink on his fingers, never bothering to read the magnificent stories he told. They saw a quiet man in a simple studio and assumed his world was just as small. They never imagined that this same quiet man was held in high esteem by people whose worlds were so vast they made my family's manicured suburb look like a terrarium. The 417 missed calls were artifacts of their own spectacular folly. Each notification was a digital ghost of a connection they had chosen to sever, a celebration they had snubbed, only to discover it was the only one that mattered. They hadn't just skipped a wedding, they had fundamentally misread the entire map of my life. Standing there, the sea breeze in my hair, I realized the most profound truth of all. By casting me out, they hadn't diminished me. They had inadvertently set me free on a grander ocean than they could ever have conceived. My sister chose the restaurant specifically to make a point. 11 Madison Park. She'd texted the family group chat 3 weeks ago. Saturday at 8. I'm booking it. Non-negotiable. The point wasn't dinner. The point was that 11 Madison Park was one of the most expensive restaurants in Manhattan, and my sister Vanessa wanted everyone to know she could afford it. More specifically, she wanted me to know that I couldn't. She'd included a follow-up text 40 seconds later, addressed to nobody in particular, but aimed directly at me. Tasting menu is $365 per person before drinks and tip. Just FYI, so nobody's caught off guard. The so nobody was me. It was always me. My name is Audrey Collins. I'm 31 years old, and I was standing outside one of the most celebrated restaurants in New York City on a December evening, wearing a simple black dress and a coat I'd had for 6 years, watching my family arrive in cars that made statements about their owners. Vanessa's Mercedes, my brother-in-law Keith's BMW, my parents' Lincoln, my aunt and uncle's Lexus, and my Honda Civic, which I'd parked 3 blocks away because the valet had looked at it with an expression that suggested it might lower the property values. 15 family members for my mother's 62nd birthday dinner, a dinner that Vanessa had organized, chosen, and funded because Vanessa organized, chose, and funded everything in this family. It was her superpower and her weapon. My older sister was the COO of a publicly traded retail company. She made $1.2 million a year in salary and bonuses. She lived in a brownstone in Brooklyn Heights. She wore clothes that whispered expense, the way some people whisper secrets, loudly enough to be heard, but softly enough to claim they hadn't been trying. And she had spent the past decade making absolutely certain that everyone in this family understood the hierarchy. Vanessa at the top, Everyone else arranged below in descending order of visible success. Me at the bottom. What Vanessa didn't know, what nobody in my family suspected for even a fraction of a second, was that the restaurant we were about to walk into was mine. Not metaphorically, literally. I owned it. 11 months ago, through my hospitality investment group, Meridian Table, I had acquired a controlling interest in the restaurant group that operated this location and 11 others across New York, Los Angeles, and London. The acquisition was part of a portfolio that included 27 restaurants, 4 food halls, a culinary media brand, and a line of specialty food products carried in 3,200 retail locations. Total enterprise value? $2.4 billion. My personal stake? $1.6 billion. The woman my sister was about to embarrass for not being able to afford the tasting menu was the woman who owned the building, the brand, the menu, and the chairs they'd be sitting in. But they didn't know that. Because I'd spent 8 years building Meridian Table behind a wall of holding companies, NDAs, and deliberate invisibility. The founder was listed as A. Collins in corporate documents, a name so generic it disappeared into the noise of business filings. My managing director, Elena Vargas, handled all public interactions. When food journalists asked to profile the mysterious investor reshaping New York's dining scene, Elena smiled and deflected. When James Beard award committees sent invitations, Elena attended. When Forbes called me the most influential anonymous figure in American dining last year, Elena accepted the recognition on behalf of the firm. And I went home to my studio apartment in the East Village and ordered Thai food. We entered the restaurant. The hostess greeted us with the calibrated warmth of someone trained to make every guest feel like the only person in the room. Vanessa approached the stand first, naturally. "Reservation for 15 under Whitmore," she said, using Keith's last name because using your husband's name at a restaurant you booked sounded more important than using your own. "Of course," the hostess said. "Your table is ready in the main dining room. Please follow me." The main dining room was exactly what Vanessa wanted it to be. Soaring ceilings, soft lighting, tables spaced with the generous confidence of a room that didn't need to maximize seating because the price per cover did the work. Every detail was intentional. I knew, because I'd approved the redesign 7 months ago. The family settled into the long table Vanessa had requested. She took the center seat, obviously, Keith beside her, my parents at one end, my brother Paul, a marketing director at an advertising agency, and his wife Diane at the other end. Assorted aunts, uncles, and cousins filled the remaining chairs. I was seated at the far end, next to my cousin Rachel, who was sweet, but talked exclusively about her golden retriever. Across from us, my Aunt Margaret was already studying the menu, with the determined expression of a woman who intended to order the most expensive thing available, as a matter of principle. The waiter arrived. "Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the restaurant. My name is Thomas, and I'll be taking care of you tonight. The tasting menu this evening is a 12-course exploration of seasonal ingredients from our partner farms." He began describing each course with the practiced poetry of someone who genuinely loved food. I listened with an attention that probably seemed excessive for someone my family assumed couldn't tell a truffle from a turnip. I listened because Thomas was one of the 4,200 employees who worked for my company. His health insurance, his retirement plan, his career trajectory, All of it flowed through decisions I'd made in conference rooms he'd never seen. The tasting menu is $365, Vanessa announced to the table, as though she was reading a verdict. Don't worry, tonight is on me and Keith. She paused, looking directly at me. All of it, including yours, Audrey. The implication was clear and public. She could afford this. I could not. She was generous enough to cover my portion. I should be grateful. Thank you, Vanessa, I said. That's really kind. She smiled the way winners smile at people who've accepted their loss. The first course arrived, a delicate amuse-bouche that Elena and the executive chef had developed during a menu revision I'd initiated 4 months ago. I knew the farmer who grew the microgreens. I knew the cost of the plate it sat on. I knew the profit margin on each course down to the penny. And I ate it quietly, while my sister told the table about her latest business trip to Milan. The origin of Meridian Table starts with a restaurant that almost closed and a palate that saw what others couldn't. At 22, after graduating from the Culinary Institute of America with dual focus in culinary arts and food business management, I took a job as a sous chef at a struggling bistro in the West Village. The food was extraordinary. The business was dying. The owner was a brilliant chef with no head for finance. Rent was killing him. Food costs were uncontrolled. Staff turnover was hemorrhaging talent. I spent my mornings cooking and my evenings rebuilding his books. Not because he asked, because I couldn't watch good food die from bad business. Within 6 months, the bistro was profitable. Within a year, it was one of the most talked about restaurants in Manhattan. The owner gave me a small equity stake as thanks. I sold it 2 years later for $340,000 when the restaurant was acquired by a hospitality group. That $340,000 was my seed capital. Instead of opening my own restaurant, which is what every culinary school graduate dreams of, I did something different. I started acquiring restaurants that were failing financially, but excelling culinarily. Great food, terrible business. The restaurant world was full of them. Brilliant chefs drowning in debt, signing leases they couldn't afford, ordering ingredients they couldn't budget, losing staff to competitors who paid better. I understood both sides, the creative and the commercial, the kitchen and the spreadsheet. That dual literacy was my edge. My first acquisition was a ramen shop in Brooklyn that was 90 days from eviction. I bought it for $180,000 in assumed debt and restructured everything except the menu. Within 8 months, it was profitable. Within 2 years, I'd added 3 more locations. The model scaled beautifully. Acquire, restructure, preserve the food, fix the business. Within 4 years, I owned 14 restaurants. Within 6, 27. I added food halls, media properties, and a retail product line. Meridian Table became the quiet giant of American dining, a holding company that controlled some of the most celebrated restaurants in the country without anyone knowing who was behind it. By year 8, the enterprise was valued at $2.4 billion. The James Beard Foundation had given awards to 7 of my restaurants. 3 Michelin stars lived in my portfolio. And the tasting menu my sister was currently bragging about paying for generated approximately $14,000 in revenue on a good Saturday night. Revenue that flowed to me. Vanessa was on her 4th glass of wine, the expensive one. She'd made a point of ordering the sommelier's recommendation, a $220 bottle of Burgundy with the casual authority of someone who wanted the table to know she understood wine. The third course was being served, a handmade pasta with black truffle that the executive chef had perfected over 6 months of development. I'd tasted 23 versions before approving the final one. Vanessa took a bite and nodded approvingly. "This is why you pay $365, she told the table. "Quality, craftsmanship. You can't get this at a chain restaurant." She looked at me with the smile she always used when making comparisons she considered too obvious to state directly. The comparison being that I ate at chain restaurants, because I couldn't afford places like this. My phone buzzed in my clutch. Elena. "Heads up, chef wants to do a kitchen tour for VIP tables tonight. Table 4 and table 12 confirmed. And Antonio wants to come out personally to greet your mother's birthday party. He doesn't know you're at the table." I typed back, "Let him come, but don't tell him I'm here. Let it happen naturally." She replied, "This is going to be interesting. Antonio is not known for subtlety." Antonio Ferrara was the executive chef of this restaurant and the culinary director of Meridian Table's entire New York portfolio. He was brilliant, passionate, Italian, and possessed zero ability to conceal his emotions. He was also one of exactly 3 people in the world who knew that A. Collins, the anonymous owner of his restaurant, was the quiet woman at the end of table 12. I'd met with Antonio 6 times over the past year, always privately, always in my office, never at the restaurant. He knew my face, he knew my name, and he had the self-control of a golden retriever seeing its owner after a long vacation. This was either going to be perfect or catastrophic, possibly both. The 5th course arrived, a seared scallop with brown butter and caviar that made my Aunt Margaret close her eyes in reverence. The wine was flowing. The conversation was loud. Vanessa was telling a story about meeting a celebrity at a Fashion Week party. My mother was radiant, genuinely happy to have her family together. My father was doing math on the bill in his head, a lifelong habit. And I was eating scallops I'd approved at a tasting 4 months ago, waiting for a 6'2" Italian chef with no poker face to walk out of a kitchen and see me. 9:15 p.m. The kitchen doors opened. Antonio emerged in his pristine white chef's coat, the one with the restaurant's emblem embroidered on the chest, the emblem I'd redesigned last spring. He was carrying a small birthday cake, a custom creation for my mother that the pastry chef had prepared at Vanessa's request. The table reacted with delight. "Happy birthday, Mom." Candles, singing, the usual choreography. Antonio set the cake down, accepted my mother's thanks, and turned to address the table with the broad, warm smile of a man who loved nothing more than watching people eat his food. "Welcome, welcome," he said, his Italian accent thick despite 12 years in New York. "It is my honor to cook for you tonight. I hope the evening has been magical." "It has," Vanessa said, leaning forward with the confidence of the person who booked the table. "Everything has been extraordinary." Antonio beamed. Then his eyes drifted down the table, past Vanessa, past Keith, past my parents, past Paul and Diane, past the aunts and uncles, to me. The recognition was instantaneous. His face went through 6 stages in 2 seconds. Surprise, confusion, realization, delight, panic, and then a very specific expression that said, "Oh God, what do I do with my face right now?" "Ms. Collins," he said, and the two words contained 8 years of secrecy, a $2.4 billion empire, and the particular energy of a man who is absolutely terrible at keeping secrets. "Ms. Collins, what an honor! I didn't know you would be joining us tonight. I should have been informed. Please, let me prepare something special from the private menu." The private menu. 2 words that detonated silently in the dining room. Every restaurant had a regular menu. Some had a tasting menu. Only the most exclusive establishments had a private menu, and it was reserved for owners, investors, and VIPs whose names appeared on the building's deed. The table went still. Not the dramatic instant silence of bucket 1 reveals. Something more subtle. A gradual freezing like water turning to ice from the edges inward. Vanessa spoke first. Her voice carried the careful confusion of someone who just heard a language she didn't speak. "Ms. Collins?" She looked at me. "He called you Miss Collins." "That's my name," I said. She frowned. "He knows you?" Antonio, who had been vibrating with the barely contained energy of a man sitting on the biggest secret in the room, looked between Vanessa and me. His poker face was dissolving by the second. "Knows her?" he repeated, and something in his tone made every person at the table lean forward. He turned to me with the pleading expression of a man begging for permission. "Miss Collins, may I?" I took a sip of water. "Go ahead, Antonio." He straightened his chef's coat, drew a breath, and said the words that rewrote my family's understanding of the evening, the restaurant, and me. "This woman," he said, gesturing toward me with both hands and the full emotional force of an Italian man making an important point, "is the owner of this restaurant. She is the owner of this company. She is my boss. She is the most important person in this building. And she is the reason you are eating tonight. Because without her, this restaurant would not exist." The silence that followed was not subtle. My mother's fork hit her plate. My father's mental bill calculation crashed. Paul spilled wine on Diane's sleeve. Aunt Margaret made the sign of the cross. Cousin Rachel stopped talking about her golden retriever for the first time in recorded history. And Vanessa. Vanessa's face went through more expressions than Antonio's had. Confusion, disbelief, computation, horror, realization, and finally, the specific shade of mortification that comes from discovering you've been patronizing the person who owns the room you're performing in. Antonio wasn't finished. He was, as Elena had warned, not known for subtlety. "Miss Collins saved this restaurant," he continued, warming to his subject. "She saved 12 restaurants. She saved 4,200 jobs. She built the most important hospitality company in America, and she did it without telling anyone her name." He turned to Vanessa. "You ordered the 2018 Burgundy, yes? Excellent choice. Miss Collins selected that wine for our list personally. She has extraordinary taste." He paused. "In wine and in silence." I wanted to hug him and also fire him. Both felt appropriate. "Antonio," I said gently, "maybe some dessert for the table?" He snapped to attention. Of course. The full dessert experience. Complimentary, naturally. Everything tonight is complimentary." He looked horrified at the idea of charging me for dinner in my own restaurant. He disappeared into the kitchen with the energized stride of a man who had just delivered the performance of his lifetime. The table remained frozen. Vanessa's $365 tasting menu, her sommelier's wine recommendation, her generous offer to cover my portion, all of it recontextualized in the span of 30 seconds by a 6'2" Italian man who couldn't keep a secret. "You own this restaurant?" Vanessa said. Her voice was flat, stripped of its usual performance polish. "This restaurant and 11 others," I confirmed, "plus 4 food halls, a culinary media brand, and a retail product line in 3,200 locations. The company is called Meridian Table. We were valued at $2.4 billion in our last assessment." My mother made a sound, small and involuntary, like the first note of a song she didn't know she was singing. Vanessa's hand was trembling around her wine glass. The $220 Burgundy, the one I'd selected for the wine list, the one she'd ordered to impress people at a restaurant I owned. "You let me pay," she said. "I let you offer," I corrected. "You needed to offer. It was important to you." She looked at me with eyes that were suddenly, unexpectedly wet. "You sat at the end of the table," she said, "the cheap seat, in your old coat, while you told everyone the tasting menu was $365, I finished, while you announced that you were covering my portion, while you made sure I knew that I couldn't afford to be here, in a restaurant I own." She set down her wine glass. The clink was the loudest sound in the room. "Why?" she asked. The question contained more than 2 decades of sibling history. "Because you needed to be the successful one," I said. "This family needed someone to point to and say, 'She made it.' You filled that role perfectly, confidently, completely. And I didn't need that role. I needed something else." "What?" "To build something that was mine, not compared to you, not measured against you, not presented at dinner tables for approval, just mine, quiet, invisible, and real." My mother reached across the table and took my hand. Her birthday cake sat untouched, its candles unlit, while something much larger was being illuminated. "How long?" she asked. 8 years, I said. She closed her eyes. 8 years of telling you to get a real job? 8 years of worrying about you? 8 years of asking Vanessa to include you in things because we thought you needed help? "I didn't need help, Mom. I needed space. And you all gave it to me by accident, by assuming I was nobody. It was the greatest gift this family ever gave me, the freedom to build without interference." My father, who had been silent through the entire revelation, finally spoke. He didn't ask about money or valuations or enterprise value. He asked the question that mattered. "Are you happy?" I looked at him, at the man who'd worried about me quietly while everyone else worried loudly, who'd never mocked me, but also never asked what I was building. "Yes, Dad, I'm happy." "Then that's all that matters," he said. "The rest is just numbers." Vanessa stood up. She walked the length of the table to my end, the cheap seat. She knelt beside my chair, which was the most un-Vanessa gesture I'd ever witnessed. She was a woman who didn't kneel for anyone. "I'm sorry," she said. "Not for tonight. For every time I measured you against myself and found you lacking. For every time I announced my success in a way that was designed to remind you of yours. For using money as a scoreboard. I put my hand on her shoulder. You're a good COO, Vanessa. Your company is lucky to have you. She laughed, a wet, broken, honest laugh. My company made $1.2 million this year. You made $2.4 billion. I'm going to need a moment to process that ratio. Take your time, I said. And Vanessa, the dinner tonight, let me cover it. She wiped her eyes. Audrey, you own the restaurant. I know, I smiled, but you offered first. That counts. The birthday cake was finely lit. My mother blew out her candles. The wish she made, she told me later, wasn't for health or wealth or any of the usual things. She wished she'd asked me what I was building instead of assuming I wasn't building anything. The dessert course that Antonio sent out was, predictably, the most elaborate in the restaurant's history. 14 courses of confectionery art that would have cost $200 per person if it had been on a menu, which it wasn't, because Antonio had created it in real time in the kitchen while presumably crying with joy. After dinner, the family lingered. The restaurant was technically closed, but nobody told the owner's family to leave, because I was the owner, and for the first time, my family knew it. Paul found me by the bar. The advertising director's brain was already working. The branding for Meridian Table, he said. The mystery founder angle. It's brilliant marketing, whether you intended it or not. I intended it, I said. Mystique sells in hospitality. The less people know about who owns the room, the more they trust the room itself. He shook his head. You understand marketing better than anyone in my entire agency. I understand food better, I said. The marketing just follows. The weeks that followed reshaped everything. Vanessa resigned from her position as the family's designated success story. Not literally, but the energy shifted. She stopped announcing her salary at dinner. She stopped choosing restaurants to make points. She started asking me questions about business that weren't performative but genuine. How do you evaluate a failing restaurant? What's the difference between a good chef and a good business? How do you know when a concept will work? She was learning, not to compete with me, to understand me. For the first time in our adult lives, we were having conversations instead of performances. My mother became a regular at 3 of my restaurants. Not for the food, though she loved it, for the pride. She'd sit at the bar and tell strangers, casually but not casually at all, my daughter owns this place. The bartenders learned to smile and pour her a free glass of wine, which she always accepted and never expected. My father visited the East Village apartment I still lived in. He sat on my second-hand couch, looked around at the modest space, and said something that I carry with me. You could live anywhere, he said. You live here because you're not performing wealth. You're practicing it. The distinction between performing and practicing became the cornerstone of everything that followed. Meridian Table grew to 34 restaurants within a year. We expanded into Chicago, San Francisco, and Miami. The James Beard Foundation awarded 2 more of my restaurants. Forbes finally tracked down A. Collins for an interview, which I gave on one condition: no photographs. The article ran with the headline, "The Woman Who Feeds America Without Showing Her Face." My mother bought 50 copies. 6 months after that dinner, Vanessa booked another family gathering. Same restaurant, same table. But this time, when the hostess greeted us, she turned to me first. "Miss Collins, welcome back. Your usual table is prepared." Vanessa smiled. No tears this time, just the clean, honest expression of a sister who'd finally stopped competing and started appreciating. "Your usual table," she repeated. I liked the sound of that. I liked it too, because the table had always been mine. The food had always been mine. The building, the brand, the vision, the 4,200 jobs and the 12 restaurants, and the entire quiet empire I'd built while sitting in the cheap seat at the end. All mine. I just hadn't needed anyone to know. Until the night an Italian chef with no poker face decided the secret was too beautiful to keep. Sometimes the most powerful person in the restaurant is the one at the end of the table in an old coat. Sometimes the woman who can't afford the tasting menu is the woman who set the price. And sometimes the best meal isn't the one on the plate. It's the one where your family finally sees who's been feeding them all along. I flew 8,000 miles, spending thousands of dollars, from New Zealand to attend my younger brother's wedding in Hoboken, only to arrive at an empty venue. My family had secretly changed the location without telling me because they claimed I'd make it all about myself. 42 days of absolute silence passed. Then last night, my phone crashed from an onslaught of 250 terrified texts and calls from them. I can stick my neck out on $1 million that I know exactly why they have suddenly become all worked up. And it has something to do with Grandpa's original will. Keep watching to see how my family reacted when they discovered, too late, that in their attempt to smoke out one stubborn New Jersey rat, they ended up burning down the whole house. So there I was, standing on the rain-slicked, uneven cobblestone pavement outside a historic, exposed brick event space in the heart of Hoboken, New Jersey, staring at the darkened, completely empty interior through the towering floor-to-ceiling glass windows, when the crushing, humiliating reality of my family's deliberate cruelty finally anchored itself permanently in my chest. Exactly 48 hours earlier, I had locked the heavy oak doors to my penthouse apartment overlooking the breathtaking glacial waters of Lake Wakatipu in Queenstown, New Zealand, where I had spent the last 5 relentless, exhausting, and ultimately triumphant years building a multi-million-dollar powerhouse career as the founder and lead director of the Southern Hemisphere's premier luxury event production and high-end tourism firm. I had spent nearly $8,500 of my own hard-earned money securing a last-minute, agonizingly brutal multi-leg flight, flying from Queenstown to Auckland, suffering through a massive layover before boarding a grueling 14-hour trans-Pacific red-eye to Los Angeles, and finally sprinting through the terminal to catch my connection to LaGuardia, all for the sole purpose of surprising my younger brother Andrew on his wedding day. I had received the glossy, elegantly embossed digital invitation months ago, detailing a sophisticated, intimate evening ceremony and reception at this exact Hoboken venue. And because I loved my brother deeply, despite the vast geographical and emotional distance that had always separated me from the toxic, image-obsessed, fiercely competitive echo chamber of my extended family, I had moved literal mountains to be there. I had rescheduled high-profile corporate clients, handed over the reins of a massive tech summit to my junior partners, and endured 30 continuous hours of recycled cabin air and cramped seating just to show up for him. I had stepped out of my premium rideshare vehicle wearing a custom-tailored midnight blue silk suit that I had commissioned specifically for this occasion, holding a beautifully wrapped, velvet-lined box containing the keys to a complimentary, all-expenses-paid luxury honeymoon I had personally curated for Andrew and his new bride. A 2-week excursion through the Southern Alps featuring private helicopter tours, 5-star alpine lodge accommodations, and exclusive vineyard tastings, completely, fully funded by my own accounts. My heart had been hammering against my ribs with the genuine, naive anticipation of a joyful family reunion, a desperate hope that for one night the petty grievances and deep-seated jealousies of my childhood could be set aside to celebrate new love. But as I cupped my cold hands against the damp glass of the venue, peering into a dark, vacant room that held absolutely no chairs, no floral arrangements, no bustling caterers, and most devastatingly, no family members, a profound and terrifying silence wrapped around me, broken only by the sound of the freezing October rain hitting the pavement. I pulled out my phone, assuming there had been a catastrophic last-minute emergency, a power outage, or a sudden venue change due to unforeseen circumstances, and dialed Andrew's number, only to be sent immediately to a generic, automated voicemail after a single ring. Panic beginning to flutter in my throat, I dialed my mother, my father, my older sister, and 2 of my aunts. Every single call rang exactly once before clicking over to an automated machine. A synchronized digital blockade that made it entirely and horrifyingly clear that my numbers had been preemptively muted or blocked by the entire familial collective. Standing entirely alone in the drizzling coastal rain, shivering in my silk suit, I opened Instagram, navigating with trembling fingers to the profile of my new sister-in-law's overly vocal, fiercely attention-seeking best friend, a woman named Brittany, whose desperate need for social media validation I knew I could entirely rely on in a moment like this. The screen violently illuminated the damp, dark street around me as her stories loaded, revealing a sequence of brilliantly lit, professionally filtered, high-definition videos of my entire family dancing, laughing, and clinking crystal champagne flutes under a massive, opulent floral archway woven with white roses and eucalyptus. The geotag on the video did not say Hoboken, New Jersey. It proudly displayed the location of a sprawling, ultra-exclusive private estate nestled deep in the Hudson Valley, a minimum of a 3-hour drive north from where I was currently standing in the freezing rain. As I watched a video snippet of my mother joyfully adjusting Andrew's boutonniere, dabbing fake tears from her eyes while my aunts cheered in the background, a notification suddenly popped up at the top of my phone screen from an anonymous iCloud email address. It contained a single, devastating screenshot of my family's massive group chat, appropriately titled The Real Family, presumably leaked by a younger cousin who finally possessed a shred of moral discomfort regarding the sheer scale of this betrayal. The message, written by my Aunt Iris, the undisputed, venomous matriarch of our family's relentless, toxic gossip mill, read in glaring blue text. Don't tell her the new address. She's been in NZ so long, she'll just try to make the whole day about her grand return. Let's have one day that's just about us. She's just going to brag about her big New Zealand life and her fancy business and make us look like small-town losers. Let's keep it intimate. Andrew deserves the spotlight. Beneath that staggering display of insecurity, my own mother had replied with a simple, validating heart emoji, followed by a text from my father, also in support, and finally, the absolute death blow, a text from my brother, the groom himself, reading, "Agreed. It's just easier this way. If she really cares, she can just send a gift from the airport and go back to her sheep." I stood there on the desolate sidewalk, the cold rain steadily soaking into the shoulders of my expensive suit, completely absorbing the absolute, unvarnished truth that my family had not simply forgotten me, nor had there been a logistical error. They had actively, maliciously, and painstakingly conspired to exile me from my only brother's wedding. They had allowed me to fly 8,000 miles across the globe, spend thousands of dollars of my own money, and arrive at a meticulously planned decoy location simply because their own profound, deeply ingrained insecurities could not handle the presence of a woman who had dared to break free and build a successful life outside the claustrophobic boundaries of their mediocre suburban existence. I did not scream into the empty street. I did not drop to my knees in dramatic, cinematic despair. And I did not march to a rental car agency to drive 3 hours upstate to crash a party where I was explicitly, entirely unwanted. Because my cutthroat career in high-end business has taught me one fundamental, unbreakable rule. You never, ever force your way into a room that has intentionally locked you out. Instead, you quietly, methodically ensure that you own the entire building. I turned my back on the darkened Hoboken venue, walked to the nearest municipal trash can on the corner of the wet street, and dropped the beautifully wrapped, velvet-lined box containing the $30,000 luxury honeymoon itinerary directly into the garbage, watching the rain immediately begin to warp the expensive wrapping paper before I continued walking 3 blocks through the downpour until I found a brightly lit, entirely unremarkable local New Jersey diner. I slid into a cracked red vinyl booth that smelled faintly of bleach and old frying oil, ordered a black coffee and a standard greasy cheeseburger from an exhausted waitress who took one look at my soaking wet, custom-tailored suit and wisely decided not to ask any questions. I sat in that neon-lit diner for 2 solid hours, methodically chewing food I couldn't taste and drinking scalding coffee that burned the back of my throat, systematically and silently processing the profound, suffocating grief of losing a family that was still entirely alive, while my phone remained completely and utterly silent on the Formica table, untouched by a single message of apology, explanation, or even basic human concern from the people celebrating 3 hours north in the Hudson Valley. But while my parents, my aunts, and my newly married brother were busy toasting to their successful deception, arrogantly patting themselves on the back for protecting their fragile egos from my supposed bragging, they were completely, blissfully oblivious to the fact that I was not the only member of the family who absolutely despised their superficiality. Nor was I the only one who had known about their pathetic, spiteful little scheme. I paid my tab, tipped the weary waitress a $100 bill, stepped back out into the freezing night, hailed another premium rideshare, and directed the driver not to LaGuardia International Airport, but to a high-end, heavily guarded, assisted living facility located 45 minutes away in the affluent, quiet suburbs of Bergen County, the permanent residence of my 90-year-old grandfather, Peter. Grandpa Peter was the undisputed patriarch of our bloodline, a brilliant, ruthless, self-made industrialist who had accumulated the massive, sprawling generational wealth that my parents, aunts, and uncles had spent their entire adult lives desperately waiting to inherit, entirely unbothered by the fact that they had never worked a genuinely hard day in their privileged lives. He had officially refused to attend Andrew's wedding, citing his rapidly declining health and frail heart. But the brutal reality, which he had shared with me during our weekly 2-hour international phone calls that no one else in the family knew about, was that he found his children and grandchildren to be a collection of insufferable, greedy, entitled vultures. And he had explicitly warned me weeks ago that they were planning something deeply spiteful regarding Will. But I brushed it off as old age talk. When I walked into his sprawling private suite, my suit still damp from the rain and my shoulders carrying the heavy, unspoken weight of the evening's ultimate betrayal, he didn't offer any empty platitudes, superficial comfort, or apologies on behalf of his deeply flawed offspring. He simply looked at me from his worn leather armchair, his sharp, faded blue eyes missing absolutely nothing of my heartbreak, and pointed a trembling, age-spotted finger toward the heavy steel biometric safe bolted into the reinforced wall of his walk-in closet. Truth is, I'd come back to New Jersey, not just for the wedding I was always destined to be locked out of, but also to meet Grandpa, who wanted me to be physically present before he executes an arrangement he had been meticulously planning with his elite private estate lawyers for the past 6 months regarding his will. An arrangement I now know was specifically designed to completely blindside the leeches who thought they had the financial game entirely rigged in their favor. I entered the complex alphanumeric combination he'd made me memorize, swung the heavy fireproof door open, and retrieved a thick, wax-sealed manila envelope containing the absolute, unalterable original copy of his finalized last will and testament. This document was a masterpiece of legal retribution. It explicitly named me as the sole, uncontested executor of his entire estate and the primary beneficiary of his massive, multi-million-dollar trust, while simultaneously freezing all of his children's immediate access to the family funds, stripping them of their assumed lump sum inheritances and placing their incredibly modest allowances into severely restricted, drip-fed accounts managed entirely, permanently, and exclusively at my absolute discretion. He made me look him in the eye and promise to take this original, notarized document back to New Zealand with me, far away from the manipulative, grasping hands of my mother and Aunt Iris, knowing that my physical possession of the true document outside of the country's jurisdiction would be the ultimate, unbreakable safeguard against the inevitable legal warfare they would attempt to wage once he finally passed away. I sat with him in the quiet, sterile room for 3 hours, holding his fragile, paper-thin hand, talking about the majestic mountains of Queenstown, the massive corporate empire I had built from nothing, and soaking in the only genuine, unconditional familial love I had ever known in my entire 30 years of existence, before I finally kissed him gently on the forehead, promised him I would protect his legacy from their greed, and walked out into the dark night with the total sum of my family's financial future tucked securely in my jacket. I checked into an anonymous, sterile airport hotel near LaGuardia, spent the night staring blankly at the popcorn ceiling while listening to the mechanical hum of the air conditioning unit, and boarded a brutal 30-hour flight back to New Zealand the very next morning without saying a single word to anyone, entirely ghosting the people who had gone out of their way to make me a ghost in their own lives, transforming from a heartbroken sister into the cold, calculating architect of their impending financial ruin. I spent the next 42 days entirely immersed in what modern internet culture refers to as ghost mode, refusing to post a single update on social media, ignoring the sporadic, guilt-driven, incredibly shallow text messages my mother eventually sent, claiming they had tried to reach me about a tragic last-minute venue change due to flooding, and completely severing all digital, emotional, and psychological tethers to the eastern seaboard of the United States. I threw myself violently and immensely productively into my work, orchestrating a massive, multi-million-dollar corporate tech summit on the pristine shores of Lake Wakatipu, expanding my firm's international portfolio by securing 3 new luxury resort contracts and finding a profound, unshakable sense of peace in the absolute echoing silence that radiated from my personal cell phone. I knew perfectly well that my family was sitting comfortably in their suburban New Jersey homes, sipping wine and smugly assuming that I was simply throwing a massive tantrum, pouting in isolation, and nursing a severely bruised ego because they had successfully put me in my place and protected their precious hometown dynamic from my overwhelming success. They genuinely believed they had won the invisible rivalry they had invented entirely in their own deeply insecure minds, operating under the arrogant, fatal assumption that because I was entirely out of sight, I was entirely out of power. Completely and blissfully unaware that the heavy manila envelope locked securely in a fireproof titanium vault in my Queenstown corner office was a ticking financial time bomb waiting to absolutely decimate their entire perceived reality. Then, on the evening of the 42nd day, as I was sitting alone on my sweeping glass balcony, watching the vibrant orange sun dip behind the snow-capped peaks of the Remarkables mountain range, with a glass of world-class local Pinot Noir in my hand, the explosion finally happened. My phone screen violently illuminated, the device literally freezing, overheating, and crashing as an unprecedented onslaught of 250 terrifying, increasingly frantic text messages, missed calls, and panicked voicemails flooded into my inbox in the span of 30 chaotic minutes. Grandpa Peter had passed away peacefully in his sleep earlier that morning. A profound, heartbreaking loss that I grieved silently and deeply from 8,000 miles away. But for my parents, aunts, and siblings, his passing was merely the starting gun for the massive inheritance grab they had been salivating over for the better part of a decade. According to the frantic, fragmented, and utterly unhinged messages rapidly stacking up on my glowing screen, my parents, Aunt Iris, and Andrew had immediately stormed the estate attorney's upscale Manhattan office within hours of the coroner leaving, loudly demanding the immediate liquidation and distribution of the assets to fund their extravagant lifestyles and pay off their mounting suburban debts. They had been met by Mr. Jackson, a stone-faced, uncompromising senior partner who calmly informed them that the estate was entirely frozen, that the outdated copies of the will they currently possessed were legally void, and that the only valid, notarized, and executable original copy of the document, the one dictating the absolute control of every single cent, was currently residing 8,000 miles away in the unyielding possession of the very woman they had deemed too arrogant and insufferable to attend a family wedding. The tone of the incoming text messages transitioned from arrogant, entitled demands to absolute, groveling, terrifying hysteria within a matter of minutes, completely abandoning their previous narrative of me being a bragging outcast. First came my mother. "Scarlett, sweetheart, please pick up the phone. Immediately, Mr. Jackson is saying you have the original document and we can't access the accounts to pay for the funeral arrangements. This has to be a mistake." This was rapidly followed by my Aunt Iris, her usual venom replaced by sheer desperation. And ultimately, the most satisfying message of all came from Andrew, the brother who had told me to go back to my sheep. "Please, sis, I need the money from the trust to close on my new house with the twins on the way. The lawyer says we get nothing without your signature. I'm so sorry about the wedding. Please don't ruin my life over a stupid mistake." I sat there in the cool, crisp New Zealand twilight, watching the frantic notifications continuously stack up on my screen, reading the terrified, desperate words of people who had actively conspired to lock me out in the freezing rain of Hoboken, suddenly realizing that they were now entirely, legally locked out of their own survival, completely and irreversibly at the mercy of the small-town loser they had tried so hard to humiliate. I did not reply to a single message. I did not answer the relentlessly ringing phone, and I did not offer a single word of comfort, because I had finally learned the ultimate, undeniable lesson about toxic family dynamics. You do not negotiate your fundamental worth with people who only discover your value when they desperately need something from you. And you absolutely do not throw a life preserver to the people who intentionally and gleefully threw you overboard. I knew that the extensive legal probate process would require my eventual participation, and I fully intended to execute my grandfather's final wishes to the exact, brutally restrictive letter of the law, ensuring they received nothing more than the meager allowance he deemed them worthy of. But for tonight, and for the next several agonizing weeks, I was going to let them sit in the suffocating, terrifying panic of their own making. I took a slow, savoring sip of my expensive wine, turned my phone entirely off, and looked out over the sprawling, beautiful, endlessly successful life I had built entirely with my own two hands, completely at peace with the knowledge that the absolute greatest revenge against people who try to make you feel small is not to yell or scream or crash their pathetic parties, but to quietly, methodically take the keys to their entire kingdom, lock the iron gates from the outside, and let them slowly realize exactly whose world they are truly living in. My sister held up her hand at the NGK rope, made of bone and condescension. "Members only," she said. She wasn't speaking to a stranger. She was speaking to me. We were standing in the marble foyer of the Briarcliff Country Club, GDK, Connecticut, a place that GDK the particular brand of social anxiety that comes from people who measure their worth by the exclusivity of the rooms they're allowed GDK. My sister, Celeste, had been a member for 4 years. Her husband, Douglas, had been a member for 12. Their children had swimming lessons in the club's heated pool every Tuesday. Their dog had been photographed for the club's annual holiday card. They belonged here the way furniture belongs in a room, solidly, permanently, without anyone questioning the arrangement. I, apparently, did not. Celeste, GDK said quietly, Mom invited me. GDK'th birthday lunch. She did, Celeste confirmed, adjusting the collar of her Roland Murray GDK dress with the practiced ease of a woman who spent $2,200 on clothing the way other people spent 22 DDK. But this is a private event at a private club. Members and their approved guests. You're not a member, and honestly, Paige, the dress code alone. She gestured at my outfit, a simple linen dress in soft white, clean, comfortable, entirely appropriate for a Saturday afternoon lunch, but not by Celeste standards, country club material. You could have at least tried, she said. My name is Paige Hayes. I'm 32 years old, and my older sister had just attempted to deny me entry to my mother's 70th birthday lunch at a GDK club because my linen dress didn't meet her personal standards of acceptable wealth signaling. What Celeste didn't know, what nobody in my family had any reason GDK, was that 9 months ago, I had written a check for $2.4 million to fund the complete renovation of the Briarcliff Country Club, the new dining room where my mother's birthday lunch was about to take place, the redesigned terrace with the imported Italian stone, the upgraded kitchen that had attracted a Michelin-trained executive chef, the restored ballroom with the hand-painted ceiling and the crystal chandeliers from a palazzo in Venice, the heated pool where Celeste's children took their Tuesday swimming lessons. All of it. Every polished surface, every piece of new furniture, every blade of manicured grass in the redesigned gardens. Funded by the woman in the linen dress who apparently didn't meet the dress code. But we'll get to that. Celeste ushered me inside with the reluctant hospitality of someone admitting a stray into a show dog competition. She walked ahead, her heels clicking on the marble I'd paid to restore, leading me through the foyer past the new reception desk I'd funded, into the main dining room where 23 family members were already seated beneath chandeliers I'd selected from a catalog in Milan. Mom was at the head of the table, radiant in a lavender silk blouse, flanked by aunts and uncles and cousins who all looked up when I entered and offered the particular brand of warm but pitying smile that my family had perfected over 3 decades of underestimating me. Paige, my mother said, rising to embrace me, I'm so glad you could make it. You look, she paused, assessing my dress with the same critical eye Celeste had deployed at the entrance. Comfortable. Comfortable. The family's diplomatic word for underdressed, unsuccessful, and probably still doing whatever it is she does. What I did, as far as this family understood, was run a small interior design consultancy from my apartment in New Haven, a one-woman operation that produced enough income to cover rent and groceries, but not enough to merit discussion at family gatherings. They believed this because I'd told them exactly that, and because it confirmed every assumption they'd already cemented about me after I declined to follow the family blueprint of marrying wealthy and joining the country club circuit. The interior design consultancy was real. What they didn't know was that it had evolved over the past 8 years into Hayes Design Collective, the most sought-after luxury architectural and interior design firm on the East Coast. We had 340 employees across offices in New York, Boston, Miami, and London. Our client list included hotel chains, private estates, corporate headquarters, and 37 country clubs across the northeastern United States. Annual revenue, $486 million. Company valuation, $2.8 billion. And one of those 37 country clubs was Briarcliff, the very club my sister used as a stage for her social performance. The club that had been hemorrhaging members and revenue for years before the board approached Hayes Design Collective about a complete renovation. The project had been my personal favorite, not because of the scope or the budget, because of the irony. I'd redesigned every inch of the space where my family gathered to celebrate their belonging, and not one of them had noticed that the aesthetic sensibility behind it was the same one they dismissed as my little design thing. The renovation had been credited to Hayes Design Collective in the club's newsletter, on the dedication plaque in the foyer, and in a feature in Architectural Digest. But nobody connected Hayes Design Collective to Paige Hayes, because Paige Hayes was the sister who couldn't afford the dress code, and Hayes Design Collective was a $2.8 billion firm whose founder was known in the industry as one of the most private figures in luxury design. The lunch proceeded with the choreography of every family gathering. Celeste held court from the center of the table, discussing her latest home renovation, which she described with the gravity of someone announcing a moon landing.
"We're doing the entire East Wing," she told Aunt Patricia. "Douglas found a contractor who studied under some Italian master. It's going to be transformational." I ate my salad and said nothing. The Italian master contractor she was describing had trained at a program my firm funded, but that detail would keep. Douglas, Celeste's husband, was explaining his investment portfolio to my father with the enthusiastic confidence of a man who'd never experienced a consequence. "We're heavily into real estate development," he said. "Commercial properties mostly, very stable, very lucrative." I thought about the $2.8 billion company I'd built, designing the interiors of commercial properties. Very stable, very lucrative indeed. My cousin Brett, a financial analyst who wore his MBA like a military decoration, leaned toward me. "So, Paige," he said, "still doing the decorating thing?" "Interior design," I corrected mildly. "Decorating. Design." He waved his hand dismissively. "Same thing, right? Pillows and paint?" $486 million in pillows and paint, I thought. But I smiled and took a bite of salmon. The salmon was excellent. It should have been. I'd recommended the chef. My phone buzzed in my clutch. My managing director, Suki Okafor, who knew exactly where I was and exactly what was happening. "The club's director, Martin Ashworth, is looking for you. He wants to discuss the Phase 2 expansion over dessert. He doesn't know you're at the birthday lunch. Should I warn him?" I typed back, "Don't warn him. Let it happen naturally." She replied, "You're going to give that man a heart attack. He rehearsed his Phase 2 pitch for 3 weeks." I smiled at my phone. My mother noticed. "Something funny, dear?" "Just a work thing," I said. She nodded with the gentle disinterest she reserved for topics she considered beneath the conversation. The lunch continued. Courses arrived and departed. Wine was poured and re-poured. Stories were told about vacations and promotions and home renovations. Nobody asked me about my work. Nobody asked me about anything, really. I was present the way a centerpiece is present, visible, unremarkable, and easily overlooked. At 2:15 p.m., between the main course and dessert, I excused myself to use the restroom. On my way through the corridor, I passed the dedication plaque mounted on the wall beside the new reception desk. It was bronze, elegantly engraved, and read,
This renovation made possible by the generous contribution of Hayes Design Collective and its founder, dedicated to the enduring spirit of community and excellence. My name wasn't on it, but my work was in every wall, every fixture, every carefully chosen tile and fabric and light source in the building. I touched the plaque briefly, a private moment of connection with something I'd built, and returned to the table. Dessert was being served when it happened. Martin Ashworth, the club's director for the past 15 years, emerged from his office on the second floor and descended the grand staircase into the dining room. He was a tall, silver-haired man with the distinguished bearing of someone who had spent decades managing the expectations of wealthy people. He was also, at this precise moment, scanning the dining room for someone specific. He was looking for me. Martin had been coordinating with Suki for weeks about the Phase 2 expansion, a $3.8 million project that would add a new spa wing, an outdoor event pavilion, and a redesigned golf clubhouse. He'd been told that the firm's founder would be in the area this weekend and might be available for an informal conversation. He didn't know the founder was at the birthday lunch. He didn't know the founder was related to the Prescott Hayes family at Table 7. And he certainly didn't know the founder was the woman in the linen dress who'd been semi-consciously excluded from the members-only conversation for the past 2 hours. Martin's eyes moved methodically through the room, past the Whitmore family at Table 2, past the Hendersons at Table 4, past the empty tables near the window, and then they landed on me. The recognition was instantaneous. His entire body shifted, his posture straightened, his expression transformed from casual scanning to focused, almost reverential attention. He changed direction immediately, walking toward our table with the purposeful stride of a man approaching someone very, very important. Celeste noticed him first. She always noticed authority figures. She sat up straighter, adjusted her hair, and prepared her social smile, the one she deployed for people she considered worth impressing. "Martin," she said warmly as he approached, "what a lovely lunch. The dining room looks absolutely stunning, by the way. The renovation was just masterful." "Thank you, Mrs. Prescott," Martin said politely. But he wasn't looking at Celeste. He was looking past her, at me. "Ms. Hayes," he said, and his voice carried the particular tone reserved for people who write very large checks. "What an unexpected pleasure. I had no idea you were joining us today." The table went quiet, not dramatically, subtly, the way a room quiets when something shifts in the air pressure. Celeste's social smile froze. My mother's wine glass paused halfway to her lips. Douglas stopped mid-sentence about his real estate portfolio. Martin continued, oblivious to the family dynamics he was about to detonate. "I've been eager to discuss the Phase 2 expansion with you personally. The board was absolutely thrilled with your presentation last month. The spa wing designs are extraordinary. And the pavilion concept," he shook his head with genuine admiration, "it's going to transform the entire property." He paused, then added with a warmth that made his professional respect unmistakable. "And I want to say again, on behalf of the entire club, how deeply grateful we are for your personal contribution to the renovation. Your $2.4 million gift didn't just restore this building, it saved this institution." The silence that followed was not subtle. It was the kind of silence that happens when reality fractures and every person in the room feels the crack run through their assumptions simultaneously. Celeste's frozen smile collapsed. My mother set down her wine glass with a clink that seemed to echo off the walls I'd redesigned. Douglas's mouth opened and closed without producing sound. Brett, the MBA cousin who'd called my work pillows and paint, turned a shade of white that complemented the table linens perfectly. $2.4 million? Celeste repeated. Her voice was barely audible. She was looking at the dining room, the chandeliers, the restored moldings, the hand-laid Italian stone floor. All of it suddenly recontextualized. "You paid for this?" she asked. Hayes Design Collective funded the renovation, I confirmed, and designed it. Every room, every surface, every detail you've been enjoying for the past 9 months. Martin, sensing he'd stumbled into something significant, looked between Celeste and me. "Your sisters?" "We are," I said. Martin's expression shifted to one of delighted surprise. "Well, then your family must be incredibly proud. Ms. Hayes' firm is one of the most prestigious design companies in the world. Your Architectural Digest feature alone generated more membership inquiries than anything we've done in a decade." The Architectural Digest feature? Celeste's eyes widened. The issue she'd displayed on her coffee table for 3 months because it featured the Briarcliff renovation. The issue she'd pointed to when showing guests the club. The issue whose cover she'd photographed beside her membership card and posted on Instagram. "That was you," she whispered. She wasn't asking, she was processing. The designer behind the renovation she'd bragged about to everyone she knew was the sister she'd tried to bar from the entrance. My mother found her voice. "Paige," she said, and the word cracked in the middle. $2.4 million? The renovation gift was $2.4 million, I said. Our design fee for the project was an additional $1.8 million. Total project value was $4.2 million, most of which my firm either funded or absorbed as a personal investment in the community. "But you," my mother started, and then stopped, because every ending to that sentence revealed something unflattering about her assumptions. "You run a small consultancy," she tried. Hayes Design Collective has 340 employees across 4 cities, I said. We design interiors for hotels, estates, corporate headquarters, and 37 country clubs. Our annual revenue is $486 million. The company was valued at $2.8 billion in our last assessment. The numbers landed on the table like physical objects, heavy, undeniable, impossible to rearrange into a shape that preserved the old narrative. Brett set down his fork. $2.8 billion, he said, in interior design. He looked at his hands, the ones that had waved dismissively when he said pillows and paint. "Not decorating," I said gently. "Design. There's a difference." About $2.8 billion worth of difference. Martin, who was now fully aware that he'd walked into a family revelation, tactfully redirected. "Ms. Hayes, perhaps we could schedule the Phase 2 discussion for Monday. I'll have the board liaison prepare the updated projections." "Monday works perfectly," I said. "Thank you, Martin." He nodded, shook my hand with both of his in the way people do when they want you to know they value you, and retreated toward his office with the careful, backward steps of a man leaving a room that was about to experience significant emotional weather. The table was silent, 23 family members staring at the woman in the linen dress, the woman who'd been seated at the far end, the woman who'd been questioned at the entrance, the woman whose outfit didn't meet the dress code of a building she'd paid $2.4 million to renovate. Celeste spoke first. She stood up slowly, her Roland Mouret dress suddenly looking less like a power statement and more like a costume. "You let me tell you that you didn't belong here," she said. "While you owned the renovation, while you designed everything, while you paid for the chandeliers I'm sitting under." "I let you tell me a lot of things," I said, "for 32 years. She sat down, not because she chose to, because her legs made the decision for her. Douglas tried to recover. "Paige, this is incredible. We should talk about collaboration. My firm does commercial real estate development, and your design expertise could—" "No," I said. He blinked. The single syllable landed like a door closing. My father, who had been silent through the entire revelation, set down his napkin and looked at me, not with shock or confusion, with something older and heavier. Regret. "How long?" he asked. 8 years, I said. He nodded slowly. "And we never asked." "You never asked," I confirmed. "You assumed. And assumptions are comfortable. They let you keep the world arranged the way you want it. Successful daughter with a country club membership. Unsuccessful daughter with the little design thing. It's a clean story, easy to tell at dinner parties. It just happens to be wrong." My mother reached across the table. Her hand was trembling. "Paige, I'm sorry." "For what specifically?" I asked, not cruelly, genuinely. She paused. "For comfortable," she said. "For arranging you into a story that was easier than the truth." I held her hand. "That's a start," I said. After dessert, I walked my mother through the club, not as a guest, as the designer. I showed her the details nobody else would notice, the way the crown moldings referenced the building's 1920s origins, the custom millwork that took 7 artisans 3 months to complete, the hand-painted ceiling in the ballroom that I'd commissioned from a muralist in Florence who owed me a favor from a hotel project in Tuscany. "This is your work," she kept saying, touching surfaces with the wonder of someone seeing a familiar room for the first time. All of it, I confirmed, including the new wing for Phase 2, which will add a spa, an event pavilion, and a redesigned golf clubhouse. Another $3.8 million. She stopped walking. "You're putting another $3.8 million into this club?" "Into this community," I corrected. "The club is how the money arrives. The community is where it lands." Celeste found me in the garden before I left. She'd changed out of the Roland Mouret dress. She was wearing flats and a sweater, the most human I'd seen her look in years. "The dress code comment," she said. "At the entrance." I know, I was wrong. About more than the dress code. I was wrong about what belongs and what doesn't. About who gets to be in the room and who gets to decide. She looked at the garden, the one I'd redesigned with native plantings and a stone path that referenced the Connecticut coastline.
"You built all of this?" she said, while I was guarding the door. I put my arm around her. It wasn't a gesture of forgiveness. It was a gesture of possibility. The door was never locked, Celeste. You just convinced yourself you had the key. She leaned into me slightly. The first genuine physical contact between us in years. The weeks that followed restructured everything. The Architectural Digest feature resurfaced in family conversations, but with an entirely different context. Celeste had shared it on Instagram 9 months ago with the caption, "Our club's stunning renovation. So proud to be a member of this community." She deleted the post the day after the birthday lunch. Then, 3 days later, she reposted it with a new caption. "Our club's stunning renovation, designed by my sister, Paige Hayes. So proud doesn't begin to cover it." It was the first time she'd publicly acknowledged my work. It was also the first time her Instagram had ever directed attention away from herself and towards someone else. The design world took notice of the reveal in its own way. 3 industry publications ran pieces about the anonymous benefactor story. Design Milk published a profile titled "The Designer Who Funded Her Own Masterpiece." Dazine featured the Briarcliff renovation as a case study in community-centered luxury design. The attention brought in 12 new country club contracts within 6 weeks. Revenue projections for the following year jumped 34%. Suki called me one morning with a laugh in her voice. "Your sister just applied for an internship," she said, "at our firm." She what? She submitted a formal application, cover letter and everything. She wants to learn the business from the ground level. She specifically said she doesn't want special treatment. I was quiet for a moment. "Give her an interview," I said. "A real one. No favoritism." Suki paused. "And if she's not qualified?" "Then she's not qualified, and we tell her honestly. But let her try. She's never been allowed to try anything without a safety net. Maybe she needs one chance to stand on her own merit." Celeste didn't get the internship. Her skill set wasn't aligned with our needs, and I told Suki to be straightforward about why. But Celeste took it with a grace I'd never seen from her. She enrolled in a design appreciation course at Yale's School of Art, not to compete with me, but to understand the world she'd been dismissing. Douglas quietly shelved his commercial real estate ambitions and asked me, humbly and sincerely, if I'd consider consulting on his existing properties. I said yes, not because he deserved it, because his buildings deserved better design, and good design doesn't hold grudges. Brett called me 6 weeks after the birthday lunch. His voice was stripped of its MBA polish. "That thing I said about pillows and paint," he started. I remember. $2.8 billion, he said, in an industry I dismissed in 30 seconds. He paused. "Can I buy you coffee? I want to understand what I missed." "Tuesday," I said. "There's a cafe near my New Haven apartment. I designed the interior." He laughed. "Of course you did." My mother visited the office 3 months later. She walked through Hayes Design Collective's New York headquarters, a full floor of a converted warehouse in Chelsea, surrounded by 340 people building things that mattered. She stood in the center of the main studio, watching designers and architects collaborate on projects that would shape spaces around the world. She didn't say anything for a long time. When she finally spoke, it was the most honest thing she'd ever said to me. "I spent 32 years looking at the wrong things," she said. "I looked at Celeste's membership and Douglas's portfolio and Brett's MBA. I looked at surfaces." She touched the wall beside her, running her fingers along a material sample mounted on a display. "You were building what's underneath the surfaces this whole time, and I never once looked beneath." "That's what design is, Mom," I said. "It's what's underneath. It's what holds everything together when the surface wears off." She hugged me in the middle of the studio. 340 employees pretended not to notice, which is the most generous thing coworkers can do. The Phase 2 expansion broke ground that spring. I stood at the ceremony beside Martin Ashworth, the club's board, and my mother, who had become the project's most enthusiastic supporter. Celeste was there too, not as a member performing belonging, as a sister watching her sibling work. The local paper covered the groundbreaking. The headline read, "Hayes Design Collective founder revealed as Briarcliff's anonymous benefactor." Below it, a photo of me in my linen dress, standing in the garden I'd designed, surrounded by the community I'd quietly rebuilt from the inside. My mother framed the article. She hung it in her living room, replacing the photo of Celeste's country club membership ceremony that had occupied the same wall for 4 years. Underneath, she added a small, handwritten note. "My daughter doesn't belong to the club. The club belongs to her." Sometimes the person they won't let through the door is the person who built the door. Sometimes the dress code is just a way of keeping out the people who make the room worth entering. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can wear to a country club isn't a designer dress or a membership card. It's a simple white linen dress and the quiet knowledge that every surface they're standing on exists because you put it there. The cocktail menu didn't have prices. That was the first thing my brother noticed, and the last thing he should have said out loud. "No prices," he announced to the table, holding the leather-bound menu like evidence in a trial. He looked at me with the grin he always used when he was about to be generous, in a way that reminded everyone he could afford to be. "Don't worry about it, Kira. Tonight's on me. Order whatever you want. Even the water here is probably $40, he laughed. The table laughed with him, because that's what the Gallagher family did when Patrick made a joke about money. They laughed, and I absorbed it, and the evening continued on its predetermined track. My name is Kira Walsh. I'm 30 years old, and I was sitting at a rooftop bar 62 stories above Manhattan on a Friday evening in October, surrounded by 17 family members who were all performing varying degrees of the same assumption, that I couldn't afford to be here. The rooftop bar was called Vertex. It occupied the top 2 floors of a residential tower in Hudson Yards that had been written about in every architecture and design publication in the country. The views were absurd. The Manhattan skyline stretched in every direction, the bridges lit up like jewelry laid across dark water, the city pulsing beneath us with the energy of 8 million lives happening simultaneously. The cocktails were handcrafted by a mixologist who'd been recruited from Tokyo. The small plates were prepared by a chef who'd left a 2 Michelin star restaurant in Copenhagen because he wanted creative freedom. The music was curated by a DJ who only played vinyl and charged $5,000 per evening for the privilege. Everything about Vertex was designed to feel exclusive, intimate, and impossibly expensive. My brother Patrick had chosen it for our father's 65th birthday dinner, specifically because it was the kind of place that allowed him to demonstrate his financial position. Patrick was a managing director at a commercial real estate firm. He made $1.8 million a year. He wore watches that cost more than cars and drove cars that cost more than apartments. His wife, Sloane, matched his energy in Bottega Veneta and quiet disdain for anyone who earned less than 7 figures. Together, they were the family's power couple, the ones who picked the restaurants, booked the vacations, and decided who deserved to be included in things. My older sister, Margot, was a dermatologist with a successful practice in the West Village.
She contributed to the family dynamic by being perpetually, vocally concerned about everyone else's skin and financial health, in that order. My parents, Frank and Diane Gallagher, occupied the center of the table with the comfortable certainty of people who'd raised one overachiever, one successful professional, and one puzzle they'd stopped trying to solve. The puzzle was me. As far as my family understood, I worked in property management, a vague, unglamorous job that I described with intentional blandness whenever asked. I managed buildings, small ones, in Brooklyn. Nothing exciting. Nothing worth discussing over handcrafted cocktails 62 stories above the city. What my family didn't know was that I didn't just manage buildings. I owned them. Specifically, I owned the building we were currently sitting on top of, and 23 others. Walsh Properties was a real estate development and investment firm I'd built over the past 9 years from a single distressed brownstone in Bed-Stuy into a portfolio of 24 residential and mixed-use buildings across Manhattan, Brooklyn, and Queens, totaling 4,800 units, generating $410 million in annual revenue, with a total portfolio valuation of $3.6 billion. The tower beneath our feet, the one that housed Vertex and 340 luxury residential units, was my flagship development. I'd acquired the land, secured the financing, hired the architects, approved every design decision, and personally selected the rooftop bar concept that Patrick was currently using to showcase his own wealth. The penthouse apartment 3 floors above where we sat, the one with the private terrace and the panoramic views that had been featured on the cover of Architectural Digest, was my home. I lived there, 65 floors above the city, in a building I'd built, above a bar my brother had chosen to impress the family, wearing a simple black dress and flats that made everyone assume I'd scraped together enough for a cab to get here. The irony was so complete, it had its own gravitational field. Patrick was ordering for the table. He did this at every family gathering, not because anyone asked him to, but because ordering for others was a power move dressed as generosity. "We'll start with the Wagyu tartare," he told the server, "the hamachi crudo, 2 orders of the truffle arancini, and a bottle of the Krug." He turned to me. "Kira, do you want something simpler? They probably have a house wine or something more." He paused. "Accessible." The word accessible did exactly what he intended it to do. It drew a line between his world and mine, between the people who ordered Krug and the people who needed a more affordable option pointed out to them by their successful brother. "I'm fine with water," I said. He nodded with the satisfied expression of a man whose assumptions had been confirmed. Sloane whispered something to Margot that I couldn't hear, but could guess from their shared glance in my direction. Probably something about my dress, or my shoes, or the general state of being Kira at a place like this. My phone buzzed in my clutch. My chief operating officer, Rafael Vega, who ran Walsh Properties' day-to-day operations from our offices on the 42nd floor of this very building. "Building manager wants to know if you want the penthouse prepped for after dinner. Also, Dimitri from the bar is asking if he should send up your usual."
I typed back, "Tell the manager yes. Tell Dimitri not yet. I'll let it happen naturally." He replied, "Your family is drinking Krug in your building and they think you can't afford the water." This is the most expensive comedy show in Manhattan. I put my phone away and ate a piece of bread.
The bread was excellent. It should have been. I tasted 14 versions before approving the final recipe for the bar's menu. The story of Walsh Properties begins with a condemned building and a calculator. At 21, after dropping out of NYU's real estate program because I'd learned more from watching actual transactions than from textbooks, I used $38,000 in savings from 3 years of working as an assistant at a property management company to buy a condemned brownstone in Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn. The building had been gutted by a fire 2 years earlier. The previous owner had walked away. The city was preparing to seize it. I bought it at auction for $38,000 because nobody else wanted a burned-out shell in a neighborhood that most investors had written off. I spent 11 months renovating it, not with contractors, with my own hands, a library card for home repair books, and a relentless stubbornness that my family mistook for directionlessness. I rewired the electrical system from YouTube tutorials. I learned plumbing from a retired contractor who lived next door and worked for pizza and beer. I refinished the floors on my hands and knees with a rented sander that weighed more than I did. When I was done, I had a 4-unit brownstone that I rented for a combined $8,200 per month. My mortgage payment was $1,400. At 22, I was generating $6,800 per month in positive cash flow from a building the city had been ready to demolish. That brownstone was the seed. Within 2 years, I'd acquired 6 more distressed properties using the cash flow and refinanced equity. Within 4 years, I had 38 units. Within 6, I'd crossed 500 units and formed Walsh Properties as a proper development company. I hired Raphael, a Columbia MBA with 10 years of experience at one of the largest real estate private equity firms in the country. He thought I was reckless. Then he saw my spreadsheets and realized I was the opposite. I was pathologically precise. The growth from 500 units to 4,800 happened in 3 years. I'd moved from renovation into ground-up development, building residential towers from dirt to skyline. The building beneath us was my masterwork, a 65-story mixed-use tower that I developed from concept to completion in 34 months, on budget, ahead of schedule, and fully leased within 9 months of opening. The penthouse, my penthouse, had been appraised at $42 million. I'd built it to my exact specifications. Every room, every material, every view line, calculated to frame the city in the way I loved most. And I lived there in complete anonymity, because Walsh Properties' public filings listed the founder as K. Walsh, and nobody in the real estate press had ever connected that initial to the quiet woman in the black dress whose family thought she managed small buildings in Brooklyn. Patrick was telling our father about a development project his firm was pursuing in Midtown. "The numbers are strong," he said, his confidence filling the rooftop like cologne. "We're projecting 22% returns over 5 years. Very solid deal." I thought about the 340% return my Hudson Yards tower had generated in 3 years. Very solid indeed. My father nodded approvingly. He'd spent his career as a mid-level bank officer. His understanding of real estate was limited to his own mortgage, but he trusted Patrick's expertise with the unquestioning faith of a father whose son wore expensive watches and used words like cap rate at dinner. "Kira," Margot said, turning to me with the concerned expression she used when she was about to be condescending, How's the property management going? Are you still doing that? Still doing it, I said. She nodded. It's honest work. Someone has to manage those buildings. I managed 24 of them, I thought. I also built them, own them, and collect $410 million a year from the people who live in them. But sure, honest work. 8:47 p.m. The sun had fully set. The city was performing its nightly transformation from daylight functionality to electric spectacle. The rooftop bar glowed with candlelight and the amber warmth of carefully designed lighting that I'd spent 3 weeks selecting with the architectural team. My phone buzzed. Raphael. Victor Marchetti is coming up. He wants to check on the new sound system installation in the private dining room. He'll enter through the penthouse elevator. He doesn't know you're at the bar. Victor Marchetti was the building's general manager, a former luxury hotel executive I'd hired away from the Four Seasons. He managed the residential operations, the commercial tenants, and the rooftop bar with the meticulous attention of a man who understood that a building is a living system, not just a structure. Victor also knew exactly who I was. He reported to me weekly. He'd stood in my penthouse living room dozens of times, reviewing operational reports. And he called me Ms. Walsh, with a specific deference reserved for the person whose name was on the building. I typed back to Raphael, "Let him come. Don't warn him." Raphael, "You know Victor. He's going to make a scene." I know. That's the point. 8:52 p.m. The private elevator doors opened at the far end of the rooftop. Victor emerged in his signature dark suit, tablet in hand, walking with the focused purpose of a man checking on his building. He crossed the rooftop toward the private dining room, his path taking him directly past our table. Patrick noticed him. He always noticed men in expensive suits. He straightened his posture, the instinctive response of a man who wanted to be seen as an equal by other men who looked successful. Victor was 3 steps past our table when he glanced to his left and saw me. He stopped, the way a car stops when the light turns red, completely, immediately, without negotiation. "Miss Walsh?" he said, and his voice carried the genuine surprise and instant respect of a man encountering his boss in an unexpected setting. "I didn't know you were dining with us tonight. Is everything to your satisfaction? Should I have the kitchen prepare your usual?" He stepped closer to the table, his posture shifting to the slightly forward lean of someone addressing the most important person in the room. And I wanted to mention, the penthouse terrace heating system has been serviced. It's ready whenever you'd like to head up. The table didn't freeze gradually. It seized, like a machine that's had a wrench thrown into its gears. Every fork stopped. Every glass paused. Every conversation died mid-syllable. Patrick's Krug was suspended at an angle that defied physics. Sloane's whispered commentary to Margot ended on an open vowel. My father's birthday smile became something more complex. My mother's hand tightened around her napkin. "Ms. Walsh," Patrick repeated. He said it the way you say a word in a language you don't speak, slowly, testing each sound for meaning. Penthouse. Victor, sensing the shift in atmospheric pressure but not fully understanding its source, continued with the earnest professionalism that made him excellent at his job. "Of course, your family is always welcome here, Ms. Walsh. Would you like me to arrange the private dining room for the rest of the evening? It has the better view of the bridge, as you know. Your terrace view is still the best in the building, of course. He smiled. But you designed it that way. I designed it that way. 6 words that landed on the table like a detonation sequence. Patrick set down his champagne. The crystal touched the table with a sound that seemed to carry the weight of 9 years of assumptions. You designed what? He said.
His voice had lost its performance polish. It was raw now, bare. This building, I said. I developed it. I own it. The tower, the residences, the commercial space, the bar we're sitting in right now. Walsh Properties. K. Walsh. Kira Walsh. Victor's eyes moved between me and my family, the realization dawning on his face that he'd walked into something much larger than a sound system check. He took a professional step backward. Perhaps I should come back later, Ms. Walsh. Stay, Victor, I said, then to the table. Victor is the general manager of this building. He reports to me, because I own the building, along with 23 others across the city. 4,800 residential units total. $410 million in annual revenue. Portfolio valued at $3.6 billion. Patrick's face went through more stages than the elevator he'd ridden to get here. Shock, computation, denial, recomputation, acceptance. And then a final expression I'd never seen on his face before. One that mixed admiration with the specific pain of realizing you've been spectacularly, embarrassingly wrong about someone for their entire adult life. You live here, Sloane said. Her voice was small. The penthouse, I confirmed. 65th floor, private terrace. The one Architectural Digest featured on their cover. She'd had that issue on her coffee table for 4 months. The penthouse, she whispered, turning to Patrick. The one you showed me online. The one you said was the most impressive residential space in the city. She looked at me. That's your apartment. That's my apartment, I confirmed. The one I designed. In the building I developed. Above the bar where my brother just offered to buy me a glass of house wine because he assumed I couldn't afford the cocktails. The silence that followed had texture. You could feel it pressing against your skin, filling the space between the candles and the skyline, settling over the table like something heavy and permanent. Margot spoke first. Honest work, she said, quoting herself from 10 minutes ago. Her face was the color of the cranberry garnish in her abandoned cocktail. Someone has to manage those buildings. That's what I said to the woman who owns 24 of them. My mother was crying, not dramatically, the quiet kind, the tears that come when you realize you've spent 30 years looking at a picture and seeing it wrong. My father hadn't spoken. He was looking at the city below us, the buildings and bridges and streets that his daughter's company helped shape. He was recalculating something that had nothing to do with numbers. Patrick stood up. He walked around the table, past Victor, past the abandoned Krug, past 9 years of wrong assumptions. He stopped in front of me. He didn't say anything for a long moment. He just looked at me. Really looked. Maybe for the first time since we were children. I ordered you house wine, he said, in your own building. You did, I confirmed, in my own bar, served by my own staff, from a menu I approved. He sat down in the empty chair next to me, not his power seat at the head of the table, the chair beside me, the one nobody had claimed because sitting next to Kira wasn't a priority.
It is now, his posture said. Tell me everything, he said quietly. Not the numbers, the buildings. Tell me how you built them. So I did. I told him about the condemned brownstone in Bed-Stuy, the YouTube electrical tutorials, the retired plumber who worked for pizza, the 11 months of sawdust and determination, the $38,000 that became $3.6 billion through 9 years of work that nobody in this family had bothered to ask about. I told him about the tower beneath our feet, the 34 months from dirt to skyline, the 340 luxury units that were fully leased in 9 months, the penthouse I designed to frame the city in the way I loved most, with sightlines to every bridge and a terrace that caught the sunrise over Brooklyn and the sunset over New Jersey. I told him about the 23 other buildings, the thousands of tenants, the families who lived in spaces I'd created, the jobs generated, the neighborhoods improved, the city reshaped one block at a time by a woman whose family thought she managed small buildings in Brooklyn. He listened. For the first time in our adult lives, my brother listened to me without interrupting, without redirecting, without performing. Just listened. Victor had quietly arranged for the private dining room to be opened. The rest of the evening continued there, away from the other bar guests, in a room with floor-to-ceiling windows that framed the Brooklyn Bridge like a painting. My mother held my hand through dessert and didn't let go. My father asked questions about load-bearing walls and zoning regulations with the genuine curiosity of a man discovering a new world at 65. Margot apologized for the honest work comment 3 separate times. I told her twice was sufficient. She apologized a 4th time anyway. Sloane was quiet for most of the evening. Then, as we were leaving, she pulled me aside. "The penthouse," she said. "Can I see it?" "Not tonight," I said, "but come for breakfast Sunday. I'll make coffee on the terrace." She nodded. "It's the most beautiful home I've ever seen in a magazine." "It's better in person," I said. "I designed it that way." After the family left, I took the private elevator up 3 floors to my apartment. The penthouse was quiet. The city glowed through the windows I'd positioned to catch maximum light at every hour. The terrace door was open, letting in the October air that carried the faint sound of traffic 65 floors below. Raphael called. "How did it go?" "They know," I said, "finally." He paused. "How do you feel?" I walked onto the terrace, my terrace, above my building, above my bar, above the table where my brother had ordered me house wine in a kingdom I'd built with my own hands. "I feel home," I said. The word had never meant more. The months that followed were the quietest transformation in the Gallagher family's history. The news spread through the extended family within days, not because I told anyone, because Patrick did. He called every aunt, uncle, and cousin individually, not to brag on my behalf, to confess on his own. He told each of them the same thing. I ordered my sister house wine in her own building. I told her she couldn't afford cocktails in a bar she owns. And I've been doing versions of that for 9 years. He said it was the most humbling phone call series of his life. 3 cousins cried. 2 aunts sent me flowers. Uncle Raymond, who'd spent 20 years in construction, drove to the city specifically to stand in the lobby of my Hudson Yards tower and stare at the ceiling for 40 minutes. He called me afterward. "I've built things my whole life," he said. I've never built anything like this. Nobody in this family has. Nobody in this family knew. The real estate industry took notice when the family connection became public. A profile in The Real Deal traced Kay Walsh to Kira Walsh to the Gallagher family dinner at Vertex. The headline read, "The $3.6 billion developer who built the city's most exclusive tower while her family thought she managed rentals in Brooklyn." Patrick framed the article. He hung it in his office at the commercial real estate firm, directly across from his own deal tombstones. When his colleagues asked about it, he told them the truth. "My sister is better at this than I am. She built from nothing. I built from privilege. The numbers aren't even close." Sloan came for breakfast that Sunday. She stood on the terrace for 20 minutes without speaking, watching the sunrise paint the East River in shades of copper and pink. When she finally said something, it was the most honest sentence I'd ever heard from her. "I spent my whole marriage trying to live in the most impressive space in the city." She turned to me. "You built it, and you never mentioned it once." I poured her coffee, the good kind, from the machine I'd picked because it made the penthouse smell like mornings are supposed to smell. Patrick stopped choosing restaurants to prove things. He started asking me about development projects with the sincere interest of a man who'd realized his sister knew more about real estate than anyone he'd ever worked with. He visited 3 of my buildings. He walked through lobbies and hallways and rooftop gardens, touching surfaces and reading tenant reviews and asking how I'd made decisions that his own firm struggled with daily. His firm approached Walsh Properties about a joint venture 6 months later. I considered it on its merits, not on family obligation. The numbers worked. We partnered on a 22-story mixed-use development in Long Island City that broke ground the following spring. Margot started volunteering at a community health clinic I funded in one of my Brooklyn buildings. She did free skin consultations for tenants who couldn't afford dermatology appointments. She told me it was the most fulfilling work she'd done in years. My mother came to the penthouse every Sunday morning. She sat on the terrace with coffee and watched the city wake up. She never said much during those mornings. She just sat there, in a space her daughter had built, watching a view her daughter had designed, absorbing the reality that the child she'd worried about most had built the highest home in the family. My father wrote me a letter, handwritten, on the stationery my mother had given him for his 65th birthday. It was short, 3 sentences. It said, "I spent my whole career in a bank helping other people build things. My daughter builds the things. I should have looked up sooner." I framed it. It hangs in my penthouse office next to the original deed for the condemned brownstone in Bed-Stuy, the $38,000 building that started everything. The building nobody wanted, bought by the woman nobody watched in a neighborhood nobody believed in. 3 things that turned out to be worth $3.6 billion when someone with vision and patience decided they mattered. On my father's 66th birthday, Patrick suggested the rooftop bar again. Same venue, same table, same skyline. But this time, when the cocktail menu arrived, he handed it to me. "You order," he said. "It's your bar." I ordered the Krug for the whole table. And when the server asked if there was anything else, Victor appeared from the private elevator with his usual timing and his usual professionalism and said the words that made my mother cry for the 2nd time on this rooftop. "Ms. Walsh, Your terrace is ready whenever the family would like to move upstairs. My father raised his glass. To the penthouse, he said. To our daughter's penthouse. Everyone drank. And I looked out at the city I'd helped build. The bridges and towers and streets that stretched in every direction. And I thought about the woman who'd stood on a different rooftop 9 years ago, on a burned-out brownstone in Brooklyn, staring at this same skyline from 65 floors closer to the ground, and promising herself she'd get here. She did. Not because anyone believed she would, not because her family invested in her, or encouraged her, or even asked what she was building, but because sometimes the most powerful foundation isn't money or connections or a brother who orders champagne to prove he can. It's a condemned building, a library card, and the absolute refusal to let the people who underestimate you determine how high you're allowed to build. Sometimes the woman who can't afford the drinks is the woman who owns the bar. Sometimes the house wine is served in a building she built. And sometimes the best view in the city belongs to the person nobody thought was worth looking at.